Well, it's 8:30 here on Wednesday, the 20th. And as soon as we get online, we're going to get going. Yep, we're online. All right. We'll call this meeting to order. Hello, hello, hello. You must not be able to hear me. Hello. We'll call this meeting to order. The first order of business is roll call.
Senator Cooper?
Here.
Senator Jones? Senator Nethercott? Here. Senator Rothfuss?
Here.
Representative Campbell?
Here.
Representative Knapp?
Here.
Representative Larson?
Here.
Representative Lawley?
Here.
Representative Riggins?
Here.
Representative Schmidt?
Here.
Representative Tarver?
Here.
Representative Weber?
Here.
Co-Chairman Heiner?
Here.
Co-Chairman Anderson?
Here.
Do you have a quorum?
We have a quorum? All right. All right. First order of business is adoption of interim committee rules. I think you guys all saw them ahead of time. There's a few little changes there that they've made. Is there any discussion on the rules for the committee? These are the rules for the committee, not the rules for the audience. Yes, Representative Campbell.
Mr. Chairman, I did have a question on that. I'm not sure I'm going to word this correctly. I'm a freshman, so please bear with me. I'm new to this body, but I've done a lot of business deals, and I'm kind of concerned with what we have as quorum, because one of the problems that we had this last session was a lot of the committee bills did not have support in both houses. So I am concerned with not voting as separate bodies that we could move forward something that faces the same fate. Thank you.
Well, I think the rules say that it's the majority of the members of the committee, not members of each body. I think the rules are just what you want, I think.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the representative is proposing we do the alternate form that is allowed for joint interim committees. It's a practice that the Judiciary Committee always enjoyed, particularly when I was a chairman, because the representative is correct. If you don't have support of the members of each chamber's committee, then it does make the passage of those committee bills harder. In light of the concerns that Management Council presented to the chairman and to the committees regarding the increasing failure of committee bills to pass, I think the representative's motion is in order, and I think it's, and I support it.
So what you would recommend is eliminating page 2D on the quorum, which changes the rules?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest looking to Mr. Fuller for the correct rule change, but there's two ways to conduct interim meetings. One is by the majority of the members of the joint committee or by a majority of the members of each chamber.
Right.
And I'm proposing each chamber, and Mr. Fuller can explain that more fully.
Would eliminating that paragraph change that to each body?
So Mr. Chairman, I think what the motion would be to amend these rules, and I can just read what the Joint Judiciary Committee adopted this week. That subsection D would be replaced with the following: the quorum necessary for the Joint Interim Committee to transact any business shall be a majority of the members of the committee. So that sentence does not change. This is a sentence that's different. A majority of the quorum may act on any matter except to sponsor legislation which shall require a majority vote of the quorum of members of each house then present. So that language would provide for, in order to sponsor legislation as a joint committee, would require a majority of the members of each house.
Is that the motion we'd like to make?
I think the good senator explained it much better than me, but yes.
All right. Any discussion? Any discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as two separate bodies, we come together during the interim as a joint committee to lay aside any differences of chambers and work together for the common good as a group of 14 legislators. I think that line between the chambers needs to be blurred during the summer, and we need to work together as a group. And so I am opposed to this motion. I would like to go to the traditional way that it's been held in years past, and similar to what's in Mason's manual, that we work as a joint committee together as legislators, and we use a simple majority that we can all support. So I'm against this motion, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion on the motion? Any other discussion on the motion? I'm in favor of the motion for the reasons that Representative Campbell brings up, that if we pass it with both bodies agreeing to it, then we'll have a better chance of passing it in the legislature. So I'm in favor of this motion. No further discussion. I don't think this requires a roll call vote, does it? So all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign.
No. Division.
Division? All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. 6? 7? All opposed, raise your right hand. What, Martha, are you going to vote? Or did you already? Oh.
I did.
She was in favor.
I didn't see your hand in favor. I didn't see it either.
Martha, were you in favor or are you against?
In favor.
In favor? Okay. So it's 8-6. 8-6 in favor of the motion. So we will proceed with each body voting on anything for proposing a bill to the legislature. Any other changes to the rules? Any other changes to the rules? Other changes? Hearing none. All in favor of the rules as amended, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries. So we've adopted our new rules. Thank you, committee. So we'll move on to our first order of business of enhanced oil recovery CO2 pipelines. And I think we have a few people here going to talk about that. Lon, are you going to kick us off?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Lon Whitman. I'm director of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, and always pleased to present to this fine committee. We thought it would be helpful with some new members that we gave a little more general overview of enhanced oil recovery, give you some perspective in the state, as well as what's currently moving forward. On this first slide, the next slide here. This is just kind of an overview showing oil and gas fields in Wyoming. And important to state that there's multiple studies at ERI and outside of ERI that indicate significant stranded oil potential in the state of Wyoming approaching 2 billion barrels. There's potential to recover significant portions of this stranded oil through improved or enhanced oil recovery methods. So ERI, my group, is focused on its mission and working collaboratively with industry to minimize stranded oil in Wyoming. But it's important to point out at the beginning that economics drive these EOR projects and IOR as well. And important to understand the costs that are behind these projects. And I'll give you a little bit of that information as we go forward. Next slide. our state, it's important, enhanced oil recovery. We are completing a study that will look at all CO2 EOR in the state since 1986, when EOR with CO2 started at the Lost Soldier Works fields. Since 86 through December of 2024, those 7 fields that are on this map to your right have produced 173 million barrels of incremental oil. And again, that's oil that would not have been produced without some form of enhanced oil recovery, in this case, CO2. And an associated tax revenue to the state from those 173 million barrels at a very conservative number, $1.16 billion. Calculating that 1.16, we looked at average monthly oil price per month from 1986 through December of 2024, and the average oil price was $51.57. And to calculate the revenue to the state, we looked at an average severance tax with ad valorem of 13%, which in most cases is considerably low. That can approach 20 to 25%. So you have a very conservative number, but a very nice one at 1.16 billion. The table outlines those 7 fields and their history and production since 1986. Some of those are relatively new. The bottom one, Big Sand Draw, only started in 2014. But what this can show you is 1986, that's nearly 40 years of CO2 injection at those 2 fields near Bear Oil, Lost Soldier and Works. These are long-term projects with long-term revenue to the state, and we anticipate seeing significant increases in those incremental oil production numbers for all fields. I'm going to start with looking at primary production, and there are an incredible number of fields in Wyoming that are still on primary, have never seen secondary or any type of enhanced or improved oil recovery. These are important targets, and these are a focus area for the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, where we'll go in and look at these fields and see what options are potentially available. But I'd like to point out some of the challenges in initiating secondary recovery in Wyoming, or enhanced oil recovery for that matter. How much reserves are remaining in these fields, the costs and the project economics, availability of water, which might sound a little surprising, but a lot of the water that we have available is incompatible with certain reservoirs. So water flooding even becomes a difficult challenge. And again, lack of necessary infrastructure. I threw this in just for a little information for you. These classifications for improved and enhanced oil recovery come from the Society of Petroleum Engineers. And they kind of guide how and what.
Question.
Closer. You bet. So on page 4, we're looking at the categories of oil recovery, and these are based on a recent report by the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which is basically the oil and gas group that defines classifications of production, what falls into which categories. And I won't spend a lot of time on here, but one thing that I will point out, the word tertiary, which is something we've used very commonly, they're recommending, the Society of Petroleum Engineers, that word not be used. It causes considerable confusion. Tertiary, and its name refers to a third process, and often it is not the third process, it could be the second process. So they've moved to use the word enhanced oil recovery for all those that are in that orange section box. Any of the processes in there would fall under enhanced oil recovery. Next slide. So we thought it would be helpful to go back through a little bit of these phases. You have 3 phases: primary, secondary, enhanced oil recovery. This graph shows you primary production and costs associated. Now, this is just relative. This is to give you an idea. You've got the lower costs in the primary production phase. $1 sign. It's not exact, but we wanted to show that as you move from primary to secondary to tertiary, your costs escalate. But that blue area and the pink area is what we're after. That's your incremental production. That's the oil that will be stranded if secondary or enhanced oil recovery technologies are not applied. That's what we do, and that's that incremental that you saw that on the first slide. So we'll look briefly at the schematic for the primary production, and this it's just a cartoon showing us a field somewhere in Wyoming, anywhere. The green shaded area represents that oil recovery during primary. And you follow that decline curve, you know exactly what that is. It's production per month. It's plotted, and you can see it'll trend down to your zero. At that point, some of these fields, as you saw on that map, production stops. We're going after the next phases. So these are just the natural occurring production drive mechanisms in the reservoir. No additional pressure maintenance, no water added, nothing. It's just the initial naturally occurring production drive mechanisms. Typically, that green shaded area will represent 15% of your oil in place. And your costs, again, are relatively low, and it's generally outlined there: equipment, labor, repairs, and utilities. On the secondary recovery, that blue shaded area represents the incremental production if secondary recovery methods are applied. So secondary, what occurs in secondary? Basically, it's you're trying to build the pressure back up into the reservoir. It can be water, or you can use gas. If there's gas part of your production and you put gas back into the reservoir, into the gas cap, you pressure back up and you'll continue to produce oil. This, again, this blue shaded area through secondary recovery will produce roughly another 20% of the original oil in place. So following primary and secondary, you've produced perhaps 30% of your oil. Again, there's a significant amount that's stranded. Your costs increase. There's additional infrastructure, different costs, labor, repairs, utility costs go up. Electricity may go up if you're pumping. So your costs start going up. But it's important to now we're into this incremental oil production phase on secondary.
Lon, so that increased it by 5%? Because we got 15% originally, now we're increasing it to 20?
Mr. Chairman, you get an additional 20.
Oh, an additional 20. Oh,
So you'll get the original 15, and then through secondary, another 20.
okay, all right.
So I wanted to give you an example on the next slide. Incremental production from secondary recovery. It can be substantial. This is the Hartzog Draw field, which you go by on your way up to Gillette. It's a substantially large field. But that incremental production due to secondary production through just a water flood was 60 million barrels. So there is significant oil that can be produced through secondary recovery. It's not insignificant. On the next schematic here, we're going to move into that pink area, which is your enhanced oil recovery phase. And the pink shaded area,
Mr. Chairman?
Question,
Yeah, just a question.
Senator.
On the previous slide,
Can't hear you.
yeah, on the previous slide, where we produced 60 million barrels of oil using water flood, how much water approximately was used in order to get that 60 million barrels?
it's a good question. You would need a lot of water. That's a huge field. So I don't have the exact water volumes, but in that case, it would be substantial. But they can use produced water, which they have, and they would augment that with Fox Hills or some water source nearby.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lon, would you would you say a lot of that water is recycled, probably a vast majority after the initial startup?
Mr. Chairman, yes, you would recycle and re-inject.
Yes, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, in this secondary production, how much of that is fueled by re-injection of natural gas along with that? Is that included in this, or is this just water only?
Well, this is, Mr. Chairman, this is just an example of a water flood. You could have examples that we could show you. I didn't bring any where the gas was re-injected back in.
The reason I'm asking that is I'm sure industry uses best practice. So as Senator Cooper said, we're going to be recycling water, but I know that they're going to be injecting a lot of gas in there as well, too.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the gas would be extremely effective as well for increasing your pressure, but you, one, have to have a supply of natural gas. So if you're producing it with your oil, if there's gas in your oil, you could separate that out and re-inject for pressure maintenance, or you'd have to purchase. So your cost, again, will go up, and also having a source of natural gas.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Lon, would it be reasonable to say that the water usage would be about the same as barrels of oil, say 60 million barrels of water? Or is that too much?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that's too high.
Yeah, okay.
It wouldn't not be in that.
Yeah, okay.
So moving to slide 9 on the schematic of enhanced oil recovery. So we have the green primary, blue incremental from secondary. Now you have a pink incremental from enhanced oil recovery. And again, you'll probably, these are rough numbers, but reasonable averages, another 25% of original oil in place with enhanced oil recovery. So you're talking, you're moving up 50%-ish of your original oil in place through an enhanced oil recovery process, which is substantially better than going with just the primary or secondary. Your costs, however, go up enormously. You'll see some examples later on, but in development of a current CO2 EOR project for one field of 3, their capital cost to startup are over $300 million, plus a pipeline, plus CO2 costs. So it's not insignificant when you start getting into these enhanced oil recovery techniques, and we'll highlight some of those as we move forward. If you're moving into CO2, you have to have a source, you have to have a delivery mechanism, a pipeline, you have to have a contract for that CO2, plus your field rework is significant. You can't use standard type piping. Costs are significant. And I think it's important for everyone to understand these just don't happen. But you get that beautiful extra incremental production.
So Lon, I'm adding these up. We got 15, 20, and 25. We're still only getting about 60% of the oil out of the formations.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. But these enhanced oil recovery projects, keep in mind, go on and on and on. You decrease your amount of CO2, but you'll continue to see oil production. On slide 10, this is the Beaver Creek field. And I would like to make several points about this. This is one of the most successful CO2 floods in Wyoming. We've never had a failure CO2 flood in Wyoming, ever. Some are better than others. That's just the nature of the game. This is one of the more successful ones. CO2 ejection started in 2005 at Beaver Creek. This is over south of Riverton. This was put in by Devon. URI worked with Devon on developing this flood. And we started seeing CO2 injection in 2005. What I'd like to point out on that graph, between 2005 and 2009, they saw no oil response. So they were purchasing, in this case, about 35 million cubic feet a day of CO2, for 4 years before they saw any response in the reservoir. So that's another capital cost to keep in mind when you look at these EOR projects using CO2. But you can see the response certainly kicked in. They went from a lower production rate to a significant increase in incremental oil production of about 16 million barrels through 2024. And that's got a long life. And there's also zones of interest that are not currently being CO2 flooded at Beaver Creek. This is in the Madison, and they're anticipating look at Tin Sleep, which could be another target zone for enhanced oil recovery.
Well, and is that 4 years because of the size of the formation? Is it just so large that it had to flow through?
Mr. Chairman, yes, partly size, but also you're repressurizing that reservoir with CO2. There could be other ways to do that less costly, but they chose to use CO2. And sometimes you'll see others that response is much quicker. This one took a number of years.
Representative Campbell.
In regard to these fields that you're doing, have any of these fields been fracked, or is this still the original in situ that you're recovering from, to where there is the potential that they could possibly do a frack job down there and possibly increase it even more?
Mr. Chairman, there's been no fracking on any of these. These are all conventional vertical wells. Some of them are reworked with new piping for CO2, but no fracking.
Thank you very much. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
On page 11, Wyoming EOR. Why EOR? We'll look at one project. This one you've seen before, we've presented, but we can give you some updated information. TR Operating is a company out of Denver, and they're developing those 3 fields for CO2 EOR up southeast of Gillette, Halverson, Raven Creek, and Dillinger Ranch. This is an advancement or a methodology that we particularly like at the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. These individual fields, Halverson, Raven Creek, and Dillinger Ranch, perhaps would not be economic alone for CO2 EOR. But because of the location and the owner having all 3 of those fields, you can put those together into one project. He will need that spur pipeline from the Exxon Green Corps line, former Denbury line, a 12-inch pipeline, about 41.3 miles at about a little over $40 million. So it's about $1 million a mile for these spurs for CO2 pipelines, 12-inch.
Oh, question. Representative Campbell.
Yeah, because, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because of the extraordinary cost associated with this, how do you guys select which fields you're going to go to? I'm going to assume that you know some areas have a lot of voids and stuff. What is the criteria for these projects to where you don't waste this CO2? I'm just seeing a lot of cost here. How do you go about selecting where you want to do this for cost effectiveness with that gas? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's the important question, because you have seen these numbers, 2 billion barrels of upside potential through stranded oil. Not all of that would be appropriate for CO2 EOR. The costs you would have no economics for the project that would be, you wouldn't do it. So you have to have a reserve remaining that's high enough to justify the project. You just run your economics, the total costs versus the recovery, oil price estimated, which is also a little bit questionable at times, but yeah, it's an economic decision for the company preparing the field.
Thank you very kindly. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alon, would you, when I look at fields like Raven Creek, they've been there 60, 70 years or more. How many reservoir studies do you imagine have been done on these fields? Multiple, I would assume, and not just on these fields, but all across the state on these older fields that you're qualifying as candidates. Would you say that there's probably been extensive reservoir studies on all of these fields over the years?
Mr. Chairman, probably not all of them, but a lot of them. And there's target fields, as I showed you on that earlier map. We're going to start somewhere. Where have they done no secondary, no enhanced oil recovery? But you've got to look at that reserve volume remaining. And in this case, again, individually, those fields would not have been economic for CO2 EOR individually. But because of this proximity and the closeness, but these have been studied, these three have been significantly studied, including Dillinger Ranch was a target CO2 flood and a pilot by Tenneco when I worked there. So there are studies that go back a long way. Yeah, so they're studied thoroughly.
You mentioned that there was not any secondary. Are a lot of these fields have not been water flooded?
A lot of fields have not, Mr. Chairman, a lot have not been water flooded.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
So in the Melaleuca, such as here, is that a natural water drive and this side as it is in the Tin Sleep across the mountain? Or so it's basically been naturally, if you would, your secondary recovery is already done because of natural water drive within those fields. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, that's very fair. And also, it's a very strong rule of thumb in the oil business. If you have a successful water flood, your chances of a successful CO2 flood are higher. You already know the flow patterns, et cetera. Water flood, and we would encourage a water flood before jumping straight to CO2. There are companies that did it differently. Denbury was one, and they believed in get it in as soon as possible and move it, but it's a financial cost.
Follow up?
When you get over in the Bighorn Basin where, for example, in the Phosphoria where it's not necessarily contiguous as opposed to the Tin Sleep, and some of those water floods in the Phosphoria have not been that successful because you'll have, good response here, no response here, and good response over there due to the inconsistencies of the formation. Is the difference in molecular structure enough to enhance that, the chances of your success in those fields as with CO2 as compared to water?
Mr. Chairman, we often talk about some of the larger fields in the Bighorn Basin. Oregon Basin, for one, is often discussed. I think there are additional challenges. That Tin Sleep reservoir is highly naturally fractured, and you have huge volumes of water. The operator of that field refers to it as a water maintenance program. And basically, you're moving 200 to 400,000 barrels of water a day through those reservoirs. So it's a maintenance issue with water and controlling where the water is going as well as you can, but you have this already built natural fracture system, which would be challenging, but not impossible for CO2, but your costs could be additionally high because of the natural fractures and the high volumes of water.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thinking more of the Phosphoria, where the water floods have not been overly successful, such as at Cottonwood Creek. I don't believe there's been Palmer flood there, but I don't believe there's been any CO2 pilots there, but are you familiar with any in that area at all?
Mr. Chairman, we are looking some fields that are not Tin Sleep. We're trying to focus on fields where you have the challenges of a salt creek that's been operating for 100 years. With well bores, often you don't even know you have them. So to to initiate and do what they've done at Salt Creek is incredibly impressive, to have had a successful CO2 flood at Salt Creek. You move into these big fields, that can also be an issue. These old well bores, your costs may be significant. So we're looking at smaller fields with potential, and it could include Phosphoria or other reservoirs in the Bighorn, to look at CO2 potential if we move that direction with pipelines and things.
Yes, Representative Campbell.
I'm looking at your pipeline, sir. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at your pipelines, and that seems to be pretty centrally located. But following up with Senator Cooper's concerns, is there a possibility for a pipeline in the north? Because we do have a lot of fields up in that neck of the woods. Is there pipeline potential to service that part of the state?
For, Mr. Chairman, for the Bighorn Basin?
Yes.
Yes, there's potential, and there are companies looking at that.
Thank you very kindly. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Let's,
Go ahead, Lon.
we'll look again, Mr. Chairman, at slide 11, and I would like to just highlight again for you some of these costs associated with this TR operating CO2 EOR project. Their start date's anticipated June 2025. They've been delayed a bit, but they are advanced and have a letter of interest for delivery of CO2 from ExxonMobil. That was the big one. You can't move forward with the project funding, any financing, if you don't have a CO2 agreement. Their estimated CapEx, $175 million for Raven Creek Field. That's one of three. And that CO2 spur, pipeline spur of about 50 million. They plan an initial CO2 purchase of 50 million cubic feet a day. And I think it's important for this committee to understand the costs associated with that 50 million cubic feet a day. Those contracts are confidential, so I don't have access, nor do anyone have access to the numbers that are developed between Exxon and the operator. But we do have some intel. And we also know that there's a rule of thumb in the industry that has proven to be quite accurate for a number of years. When you're in meetings and people are talking about the price of CO2 for EOR, we know that 2% of the current West Texas Intermediate oil price per 1,000 cubic feet of CO2 is quite accurate. 2% of West Texas. So if we looked at an example, $63 a barrel, and it's not quite there now, but it was when this was put together. 2% of $63 is $1.26 per MCF, 1,000 cubic feet. In this case, they're buying 50 million per day. That takes their cost per day for CO2 to $63,000 a day, just for the CO2. So that's roughly about $23 million a year to purchase CO2. And that's quite accurate. So we were talking about that Beaver Creek field where they went 4 years with no response. That was over $64 million they spent just on CO2 for 4 years with no oil production. So these are not for the faint of heart.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you. Lon, I just have some high-level questions as the committee starts digging into this topic in the interim, and a lot of new members on this committee, including myself. So I really appreciate this overview of EOR in Wyoming and how it works, but I'd like to go even higher level with some kind of probably simple concepts, but maybe some of us don't know. So you're mentioning CO2 being used to inject, and CO2 is a very controversial topic. But I think its application here may be different than the controversy surrounding CO2 in other conversations. And so in this case, can you share with the committee, where is the CO2 sourced and how does it get valued?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and there'll be some more of that later on, but I'm glad to address that. So in Wyoming, since 1986, with the first CO2 flood, all our CO2 in Wyoming is captured. Largely, 99% of it comes from ExxonMobil Chute Creek and their LaBarge platform, or LaBarge carbon capture project, largest in the world. So they source for EOR right now 340 million cubic feet per day for enhanced oil recovery.
And Mr. Chairman, follow up? Lon, thank you. And so Exxon participated in a carbon capture project to capture the CO2 that they were previously emitting. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I think we have to certainly respect Exxon as a key part of CO2 EOR in Wyoming. There's no question. In 1986, we were not looking at CO2 as the bad guy. And you can see in the oil business, they're paying a very premium price for this. So it is a very interesting dichotomy that you have one side that says it's destroying the planet, and on the other side, you have a group that's paying a premium price. But I think what is important in Wyoming, we have no natural CO2. You don't drill CO2 wells. They've done that, they've looked. So everything we have for EOR comes from ExxonMobil, and they've been a key partner in this since 1986. There's a very small amount, roughly 25 million cubic feet per day from the Lost Cabin gas plant that's owned by Contango. That's also used for EOR. It goes into the pipeline system. So we're roughly at about 365 million a day with potential of another 120 million for EOR July 1st with a plant expansion at ExxonMobil. On slide 12, look at another quick look at another developing project. These are developing CO2 EOR projects in the state. This is the Glenrock Energy CO2 EOR project at the Big Muddy Field, about 15 miles from here. In Glenrock. It's the South Glenrock B unit, SGBU, and within that unit, there's 3 reservoirs that will be CO2 flooded. Their estimated recovery is about 38 million barrels. Their estimated startup CapEx, 350 million, and a spur, if they need a CO2 spur, which they potentially will, it's a bit longer, 60 miles, at about 96 million. Another important factor for the company, I think for this group and everyone to understand, what's a payout on this? We were asking Representative Campbell, how do you decide how to do this? This project, for instance, and the one TR operating, they estimate 60 months, 5 years for payout, for break even 5 years. So these are long-term. They'll Lost Soldier Works fields since 1986, almost 40 years.
Question, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the federal administration repealing, as you said, CO2 is the bad guy. This new administration does not see CO2 as much as the bad guy. I'm looking here on this Glenrock project, and we're, with the cost of this, that's running a 12-inch, 60-mile pipeline. Since Pacific Corp has we've rescinded the sunset, some of these power plants, would it not be more economic viable to source? Can they still look for other sources, such as the Dave Johnson power plant, for example?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there is a project developing at Dave Johnston, Rocky Mountain Power with 8 Rivers capture technology on Dave Johnston. So that project is advancing. That certainly that power plant is, you can see it from your producing well.
Thank you. Follow up. My question with that is, I represent Glenrock, so I'm aware of the possibilities there. But going back to CO2 pipelines and support for these projects, Wyoming does have a number of power plants that are scattered throughout the state, to where would that not make more projects viable, being able to access CO2 from these plants?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Again, I think understanding that all CO2 we have is from capture. We have 5 developing CO2 EOR projects in the state of Wyoming. There's no other state that has 5 developing CO2 EOR projects. And if they move forward and require the CO2 that they will need, we will be in a shortage.
Last question and follow up to this, what would that do to the cost? Because the way that I'm understanding this is these companies are purchasing the CO2 out of these lines. If we were able to supplement it locally, what would that do to, would that be an exponential reduced cost, or would it, how would that?
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to say, but I would anticipate that you wouldn't see a significant price drop. The cost of these capture projects is significant. So if you're capturing CO2 off of Dave Johnston, I would not see that you would necessarily have a price drop of the CO2.
My question wasn't so much as to the actual CO2 itself. It was more involved with the pipelines, the pipeline cost. There's a difference between a 20-mile pipeline and a 120-mile pipeline, is where I was going, sir.
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. If you only have to go from the power plant to the South Glenrock B unit, you're talking 4 miles or something rather than 60. So yeah, your pipeline costs, the projects would be significantly advantaged.
Thank you very kindly. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Lon, would that unit at Glenrock produce enough CO2 for the flooding that field? Or would they have to bring in more?
Mr. Chairman, we worked with 8 Rivers, not on their technology, but on, if we move forward, are there fields nearby that would be appropriate? They estimate having over 100 million cubic feet per day when they're at full capture off the power plant. So it's substantial.
Representative Tarver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Lon. I got a question for you, and maybe everyone already knows the answer to this, but typically when you start out with a CO2 project, of course, you start out with X number being injected. Do you have a percentage over time, how that gets limited? And then at what point are you just recycling with just a small amount of CO2 being purchased? Do you have a time frame that kind of encompasses all projects, or are they all extremely unique, or can you kind of just touch on that?
Mr. Chairman, they are each unique. However, that is exactly what happens. They will start with a 50 million cubic feet a day purchase for TR Operating 4 Raven Creek, but they're going to flood 2 additional fields. So you're going to see that purchase volume increase as they move forward with the other 2 fields. However, as they advance, I don't know that I have a good rule of thumb number, because it does depend on the field and the size of the field. But you will see certainly Salt Creek now, all of these, Monell, they all decrease in their purchase, and they are only recycling. So that's the natural process. I think, the conversation about evil and good of CO2, one nice thing to keep in mind when you do CO2 EOR, you're storing all that CO2 underground, and the oil you produce is minimum carbon to no carbon footprint based on the amount of CO2 you actually store to get the barrel out. So which is why CO2 EOR was included on the 45Q. It is a storage, an improved storage for CO2 while making oil at the same time.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So something else that I find interesting too, would you give everyone an explanation of why, so when you go from water flooding to CO2, what is the CO2 actually? I mean, is it opening up fractures? Does it carry the product? Can you give us a slight description of what actually CO2 is doing with the oil?
Mr. Chairman, yes. So on these enhanced oil recovery technologies, and we can look at specifically at CO2, for it to be enhanced oil recovery, there has to be a chemical or a mineral change in the reservoir with something that was not present in the reservoir to start with. So for instance, if you were producing an oil field that had a high CO2 concentrate, a high concentration of natural gas, and you re-inject, technically under standards by SPE, that is not an EOR project because the product already existed in the reservoir. So when you inject CO2 as a solvent, it acts as a solvent in the reservoir, and it actually absorbs oil, moves it through the pressure, and then releases the oil in a nutshell. There is a chemical type reaction perhaps, but it's an agent that finds oil left behind, moves it out and releases it. You capture that CO2 and re-inject it. So there's surface equipment that we didn't discuss in this, but there's substantial costs for surface equipment recycling where they separate all this out. They don't lose a drop of that CO2. You see what they're paying for it. They know exactly where it goes and they want to monitor very closely.
Question, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, so the way that I understand this, theoretically, then, following up on Representative Tarver's question, is eventually you're going to hit saturation point and you will know when you've completely depleted that reserve. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's very correct, yes. And so you'll end up, your oil production will go to zero or non-economic. And through CO2, there will be no more coming back out.
But we could use this as is there any way to use that as a gauge? And, well, you can tell as the product decreases where you're going in regards to how much saturation you have. That's very intriguing. Thank you very kindly for your answers. No more further questions, Mr. Chairman.
No more forever? Representative Hyde, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Whitman, thank you for being here. I'd like to go back to the 45Q tax credits a little bit as we try to incentivize beneficial use of CO2 rather than just storage. The 45Q obviously is weighed heavily towards storage and sequesterization rather than benefit. The structure is. So as we try to levelize that and provide incentives for the producer of CO2 to actually utilize it for enhanced oil rather than just storage, there's a disparity there, $85 compared to $60 per metric ton. But then as they sell the CO2 to an enhanced oil field, you get the dollar something for 1,000 cubic feet. But there's the cost of transportation as well. So there's a lot of pluses and minuses that goes into this accounting book. So when it's all done, when it's all said and done, by selling the CO2 to a producer that uses it for enhanced oil, is it more beneficial for someone like some company like Exxon to sequester it or to sell it down the pipeline, pay for transportation, and receive the dollars when they actually sell it? Which is most beneficial on a monetary standpoint for the producer?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the 45Q and then our Senate File 17 was to incentivize an even playing field in Wyoming for captures of CO2 that would sell for enhanced oil recovery, with the goal being there would be a price adjustment or a tax credit adjustment with the operator. And I will go back to your direct question, but would let the group know that I received information today that Senator Barrasso, his plan had been to level 45Q at 85 and 85. With Senator Kramer from North Dakota, they are moving that to 120 and 120. But the feeling is the 120 for dedicated storage may not go through. So the impression is this administration favors EOR, which makes sense. But we'll see where that goes. Whether or not, we had quite a number of conversations with people writing the bill, EOR, myself, and they asked what I would like. And I said, well, I would like 185 for EOR and 10 for dedicated storage. Of course, that isn't going to happen. But if you want to incentivize EOR, there has to be an incentive. You see the costs. I think for the state of Wyoming is to ensure that that $10 per ton is in some fashion shared equitably with the oil and gas operator. I think, I won't speak for Exxon, but I think there's a multiple factors in how you would decide whether you want to dedicate your storage or sell for EOR. Their chairman has stated publicly that EOR is not a platform for ExxonMobil moving forward. But I think this is my evaluation of Chute Creek. Clearly, their main product is helium. And to get more helium, you're going to have more CO2. And they're physically limited currently on how much they can re-inject into their own field using Class 2 wells only. There's one new one, and there's another one apparently, I believe, permitted. But they're going to be, you can't take 340 a day plus another 120 with the plant expansion currently and re-inject it into their reservoir. So EOR in that sense is very important for Exxon at Chute Creek. And they're certainly not opposed to it. They've been extremely supportive of EOR in Wyoming since 1986. My commissions met with them at Chute Creek. There's a very positive relationship, and they continue to support enhanced oil recovery in Wyoming. But it's very difficult to know on a corporate level how they would make that decision. But for the state of Wyoming, when you have no revenue from dedicated storage, this option is far superior.
Follow-up to that, Director. I guess clarify my question. At what price would a producer have to charge for CO2 to make up the difference for 45Q tax credits today? So you, in your example, you have a little over $1 per 1,000 cubic feet. What price would make that equitable so it's same as the 45Q? So you get $85 per ton to inject it, or you get $60 a ton plus the cost to sell it. Maybe it's $2 per thousand. Maybe it's $10 a thousand. Do you have any idea what that price would have to be to make that equal? Because with the Senate File 17 that we passed last year, there's no assurances that's going to go back to the producer. We're hoping it does, but there's no assurances that that actually will happen.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. There is no assurance that that's going back to the operator. If you look at that $1.26 per 1,000 cubic feet, that works out to roughly $22 a ton for CO2. That then you can perhaps look at that dedicated storage scenario more effectively using tons. Oil and gas people don't work tons. We can convert and go back and forth, but we talk MCFs, million cubic feet, they're talking tons. But that $1.26 per MCF works out to roughly $22 a ton. So I don't have off the top of my head the number that would exactly level that, and that's going to be oil price dependent. There's a lot of factors in there, but I could certainly put something together for you, even with sliding oil prices, so you have a sense of what we're looking for.
Other questions? Go ahead, Lon.
All right, so if we'll move to page 13, and we were talking pipelines earlier. This is the current CO2 pipeline infrastructure in Wyoming. I should say that, we're quite fortunate to have this. It may not be enough, and there's areas where it doesn't go. But there's other states that are quite envious of this, that are also looking to develop CO2 EOR with no infrastructure in place. Again, Chute Creek Plant in the southwest corner of Wyoming is your main source at about 340 million a day. That first line coming out, kind of the blue shaded line, is their Exxon line. I guess it's easier to say every line on here is Exxon now, except the yellow line, which is Contango. And some of the small spurs going into their fields are owned by the companies. But all the major trunk line, southwest to northeast, is owned by Exxon. And that delivers that 340 million cubic feet a day. There's a small amount going down on that Raven Ridge pipeline in the southwest corner, again, owned by Scout. That's the former Chevron field, Rangeley, that's now operated by Scout. And that's a smaller volume going in there. I would say we're talking 15 to 20 million cubic feet per day, but they do have some potential expansion going on at Rangeley, potentially. We have that purple line going up into the northeast. That went to Bell Creek Field and the Cedar Creek Anticline development by Denbury. Cedar Creek Anticline, they had some technical issues in the reservoir. I know they're not purchasing any additional CO2 currently into that Cedar Creek Anticline project. It's all recycle. There's a smaller amount going to Bell Creek, which I also understood will be reduced. So the out-of-state number is always a question for everyone. Currently, it's a very small amount of that 340. There's a small line that goes from the Lost Cabin gas plant, basically right in the center of the state. That's that 25 million a day that was being purchased and taken up to the Cedar Creek Anticline, Bell Creek fields. That said, that's basically that is your CO2 pipeline infrastructure. There were questions about potential into the Bighorn Basin. There are, through the Wyoming Pipeline Corridor Initiative, identified pipeline routes that are available for pipelines into the Bighorn Basin. There is a potential of moving from the Lost Cabin plant into the basin, which might be simpler for some reasons than trying to go from the south in. But there are companies looking at that. They're actively looking at it. So we're encouraged to see perhaps some movement and some support from the Wyoming Pipeline Corridor Initiative.
Yes, Senator Ruffus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lana, a couple questions. The first, you said we're at 365 million at this point in time. How much did you say was being delivered in-state versus out-of-state? What are the totals there?
I would believe that out of that 365, Mr. Chairman, you're probably talking 340 in-state.
340 in-state. Okay, that's great. That's way better than it was in the past. Second question, Mr. Chairman. At the Lost Cabin gas plant, is there capacity to expand if there was a desire to provide a significant amount of CO2 into the basin? Is the first half of that question. And the second is, what is the capacity of that line? Is it expansible also going east out of Lost Cabin?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there is expansion. The plant could be expanded, but your source for CO2 is declining.
It is, okay.
So there's no intention of drilling new wells in that field. We looked at that with Conoco. that operated that 2005, 6-ish, and they planned to put that CO2 up for sale. And at that time, I believe they were at 50 million cubic feet a day, declining to zero with no upside.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, on the capacity of the pipeline, if you started looking at the pipeline going the other direction is my intent. So instead of drawing away from Lost Cabin going to the east, if we had a significant build out within the basin, you'd want to be bringing it up that pipeline. So what is that pipeline's rated capacity?
Coming out of Lost Cabin, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman? What I can tell you exactly is that is not full. It's not near capacity. The only line that has that issue is the main Exxon line, the green line over to, however, that too can be addressed at some level with additional pump stations.
So it's pump limited, and that would probably be the case
pump
also at
limited.
Lost Cabin, it's pump
Correct.
limited.
But I think the development plan, Mr. Chairman, with that green core line was much more extensive than they ever saw. So I think there's a significant, I know there's a significant capacity on that purple line that exists.
Okay, so if there were a desire to bring 50 or 100 million cubic feet into the basin for a large build-out, we've at least got a good start to that infrastructure going into the Lost Cabin plant.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. And who owns that? Is that Exxon also? I think that's Exxon.
Contango.
That's Contango. Thank you.
Representative Campbell?
I wasn't done. Quick question, this is kind of not related to the last, but in regards to the Lost Cabin gas plant, I know over there in that Bonita Divide area, at one time they were looking at putting fields over there and production water was a major issue. Is there any application in that general area where we could utilize that production water to enhance some of these areas and bring that area online? I mean, do we have the capabilities, or have we looked at balancing different fields, utilizing different resources from, does that make sense, sir?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that makes sense. I think your transport costs, pipeline, how would you, moving the water could be a potential deterrent, but that's a very good question, and I don't know if that was ever looked at. I will take a look, though, it's interesting.
Thank you very kindly, Director. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Moving
Lon, go
right
ahead.
along. Page 14. So CO2, EOR, and beyond. I think I'd like to, I am closing down, actually. I want to point out that CO2, most people, when you think of EOR in Wyoming, the first thing you're going to mention is CO2 EOR. I think it's very important to note that in Wyoming, not all fields are applicable for CO2 EOR, some of the reasons we already discussed. And we're strongly moving forward with other EOR technologies in Wyoming that could be very appropriate, as you'll see. We have polymer EOR, NGL EOR, enriched air EOR that are active today in Wyoming. And I'd like to highlight some of that so that you have a perspective that, well, maybe we can't do CO2, but there's other things we can do that are extremely effective and perhaps more cost-effective. So on slide 15, I'd like to show you this Edsel polymer augmented water flood. Polymers have been very effective as agents to increase and enhance oil recovery. This polymer augmented water flood was started at the Edsel field at the onset of a secondary recovery. So they were going to start a water flood, and they decided they would add this polymer to it and augment their water flood. You can see on the map, it's where the location in the very northeast corner of the state. They did this polymer augmented water flood for 5 years and then stopped. So the blue shaded area is above it, that purple area is the augmented water flood amount. They stopped, we weren't involved in that, but that produced an additional 1.9 million barrels out of that small little purple area where the polymer augmented water flood was implemented. It's now just the blue shaded due to a regular water flood, but substantial again. But there are alternatives, and polymer augmented water flood is something that we're digging into. We've looked at a couple polymers in the Bighorn Basin where we have lots of water. I just wanted to point this out, one technology.
Question here, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, polymers and surfactants are being utilized quite a bit, or were utilized quite a bit in Europe. Are they seeing the same results as what you're seeing here with this water flood? That it didn't react as well as expected, and maybe CO2 is better? Because I know they've used surfactants a lot over there in Europe.
Mr. Chairman, that's a very fair question. So you've got these polymers, you've got ASPs, you've got a variety of different levels with surfactants added in. There have been successful chemical floods, we'll put them into that category, in Wyoming. We worked with Citation, who did a chemical flood. I have to think of the field name, it doesn't matter. They would tell you that it was technically a success, economically not successful. So the costs associated often with these very advanced chem floods, ASPs, et cetera, it's not insignificant. So they have been successful. We've never seen them as of interest in Wyoming as other places. I joined on Dr. Pope. Gary Pope was a big chem flooder leader. He invited me onto this consortium for several years. What I found interesting, and no criticism, the big floods were always in China or somewhere where you really could never see the data, but they were very successful. And I'm like, but we'd like to, could we try that like in Powder River Basin instead of China? We never could get that moving, but we know that there are successful ASPs and chem floods around the world, but the price is not insignificant. On slide 16, we have a project in Wyoming also looking at NGLs. And NGLs, natural gas liquids for enhanced oil recovery. They've been proven, they're very, very effective agents, a solvent again for enhancing oil production. The CO2 EOR option is perhaps not, we know, not economically viable for many fields. And we know from studies that NGL EOR can produce another 20%, which is similar to what you saw on some of those graphs earlier. What's prevented it was the cost of NGLs in the past, and those have dropped. We're launching July 1st a NGL EOR project at Jiggs Thompson Field with Sunshine Valley Petroleum and X-Oil. We're looking forward to see the recovery and the costs associated, but it looks very, very positive. With NGLs, for instance, one of the benefits is you purchase your NGLs and you recover them, and you can sell them or you can reuse them. You can move them where you want them. So this is a more mobile technology that could be applied in hundreds of fields in Wyoming where you wouldn't do CO2 EOR normally because of the cost. So we're very excited to see how this NGL EOR project moves forward. That was partially funded or supported by the Wyoming Energy Authority. We think it has huge potential in Wyoming. The nice thing on the map, just go to your eastern edge of Wyoming, all the way down, there is an NGL pipeline owned by One Oak that goes the entire length of the state on the east side. This Jiggs Thompson field, I'm giving the wrong field actually. The field sits directly on the NGL line, and it'll be an option depending on how this initial test EOR project with NGLs goes, to work with One Oak for supply of NGLs right off that pipeline. So we're looking forward to see how this moves, and we're looking for other EOR options in our state beyond EOR in locations where CO2 EOR is not economic.
Lon, I noticed you mentioned a couple times that we don't recover the CO2, but I think the Salt Creek field has a process to reuse or recover it and reuse it. Is that unique in the CO2 areas? Do all the rest of them leave it in the ground?
Mr. Chairman, so they absolutely recycle. All those projects recycle and re-inject, but eventually they quit purchasing and only re-inject, at which point eventually there will be no more coming to the surface. Everything will remain stored in the reservoir and you don't access it.
Okay.
So this is a direct in the tank, out of the tank, use it, buy it, sell it. It's quite advantageous. Skull Creek Field, I mentioned the long field on page 17, some highlights of this NGL flood at Skull Creek Field with Exoil Sunshine Valley Petroleum. NGL costs are about $2 million. They anticipate flooding about 15% of the pore volume with that NGL on a pilot area. Skull Creek is the green field on your map on the right. That little yellow down in the bottom corner is Skull Creek Field. These are trends, fields Sunshine Valley and/or Exoil own, where they are planned to test this NGL EOR technology if that green Skull Creek Field is successful. We're very optimistic. We know that it's been very, very successful NGLs. It's just been a cost for the NGL that's prevented. They anticipate a 20% recovery or even higher based on some initial calculations in a water flood. There'll be some associated costs. Field workover costs $2 million, total project costs for this pilot of $4 million, and the incremental oil recovery of about 5.6 million barrels. But this is a small pilot within one section of the field to see how this goes. And as I mentioned, the Wyoming Energy Authority did financially support this project.
Lon, I have a question. Those NGLs, they're going to some market somewhere down that pipeline. So it's better for them to waylay that and sell it to some field? Is it economical for them to do that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they're open to doing that. But before the company went through that full process of working out something with One Oak, let's try a pilot, purchase the NGLs outside of the pipeline, test the pilot based on success and volumes needed, advance the deal with One Oak for direct delivery off that pipeline. On page 18, another example of Wyoming EOR project moving forward with enriched air. This is located also by Gillette, Alpha Field. This is a project with ATR, Advanced Thermal Resources, a company out of Dallas, Texas. They've done this technology in California, Bakersfield area, and they've also run a small pilot in Wyoming prior to moving on to the Alpha Field. Total project costs for this is about $20 million and about 4.8 million barrels of EOR incremental production. But what they're also looking at is their increased production rate. So currently at about 5 barrels a day, they anticipate that going to 500 per day in 2 years. That project should have gas or enriched air being injected this week. So we'll start seeing some results on that. It's an interesting process. You kind of have a direct air capture system. He's got a little portable unit that they've developed that sucks in air. It's enriched, nitrogen is removed, it's injected into the reservoir. Because of the temperature and pressure downhole, you actually have some heat form steam, and including CO2, hydrogen, there's other products that are produced. You minimize the methane or the nitrogen because it's not effective in that flooding. So that they remove and enrich it, inject it. There's almost an in situ process, heating, steam created heat and CO2, and they cycle that through. So they're creating their own CO2 on site. And again, a portable unit. This can go to any field where you might want to try this. We're looking for portable options where you don't need pipelines, you don't need CO2 supplies. And again, they're anticipating a nice recovery from that project.
Question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Lon, is this igniting or is this just a chemical reaction that's taking place?
It is igniting, Mr. Chairman, it is. It's an in situ process. So we should have some information for you shortly. We'll start injecting, I think, this week. And that, again, was supported also by the Wyoming Energy Authority, looking at these options for EOR outside of CO2.
Lon, do we know what they're doing with the hydrogen? Do they have a storage facility for the hydrogen, or how are they getting the hydrogen to market?
Mr. Chairman, they haven't addressed that yet. They want to see what kind of volumes they're going to have and what would be options. It may be such a small volume that it wouldn't be worth trying to capture that or separate that. We'll have more information here soon how he wants to do it. It's a very interesting project.
Thank you.
On page 19,
Representative Campbell has a question.
Yeah, I do have a question on that as far as hydrogen, because hydrogen is so light, notoriously difficult to contain. I'm just curious what they're looking at with that, because I mean, that is, that's a real tricky one to try to capture there. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we haven't really discussed that with them. I just know that there is a small amount of hydrogen that is produced in this process. And I think I think they're looking to see how, first, what volumes are created, and is it worth added expense to separate that hydrogen? But they're looking at their options. On page 19, a little bit on collaboration, how these projects move forward. That was a question before. There is a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of collaboration and support that's needed. EORI, Oil and Gas Commission, Wyoming Energy Authority, all the regulatory agencies, they're all part of this, and you'll hear from Oil and Gas Commission in a minute, and as well as PAW. EORI specifically, what do we do? These are small companies. TR Operating is 2 people. They're small, and they're going into a massively high-cost investment. Glenrock Energy is a small company. They're not Exxon's doing these CO2 floods. Often, they don't even have reservoir engineers. They don't have modeling capacities. They don't have, their teams are tiny. That's where we fill in the gap. We provide the technical background, the reservoir engineering, the modeling, the geology to support the project. Not as a consultant, but more as a third eye. They'll do their geology, we'll take a look, we'll make suggestions. It goes back and forth. We also are able to field test some of these things. We did 2 polymer tests. There's one ongoing in the Bighorn. We did one this summer, last summer. That was quite effective polymers for casing hole leaks. That's, I think, going to be quite important for the industry in Wyoming. The cost savings are significant. So that just gives you a little sense of what EORI, my group, does and how we help support these projects. On page 20 now, some of these problem areas. How could the state potentially get involved moving forward? That was the good question. How do you decide which ones go? There's some things that we can't really control, but economics drive all these projects. Crude oil prices are critical. I know that earlier days at Salt Creek, their break-even oil price was $50 a barrel, and if it dropped below 50, they were not making money any longer. So it is a very touchy thing, this oil price. Often on these CO2 contracts, there is a flexibility built in that if the price drops below this amount, they lower the price slightly. If it drops below this oil price, they lower it again. So there is some great work with Exxon on that factor of the oil price.
Lon, is that $50 WTI or is that $50 Wyoming?
Wyoming.
Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that would be what their oil prices they're receiving, so.
No, you don't have a quick.
I know. How did you come to that dollar number at the $51? Because I personally think that that is, my opinion, where we're going to end up here in the next year is where we're going to be. How did you come up with that number, sir?
Mr. Chairman, that was more a discussion with Anadarko like this. What's kind of your break-even point right now? At that point, they were saying $50 oil was kind of, we're getting to, yeah. So there are a lot of things that affect this, that crude oil price, the regulations, taxes in Wyoming are very high. Royalties can be very high also. There's high operating costs. It's just expensive. And the cost to implement these IOR and EOR projects, as you've seen. Technologies, capital startups, it's impressive what these companies are going after. The price for CO2 is not insignificant. And then you've got the transport and pipeline costs, infrastructure costs. So I think it's just important for the committee to understand that this isn't EOG doing these. It's not Anschutz. These are small companies that are moving into the state. They like being in Wyoming. They know we have a CO2 supply, and there's abundant fields with upside. It's a very strong drawing card. So we're hopeful. There's some really, really impressive projects moving forward. Beyond these are factors beyond the control of the legislature, for sure. We can't do anything about crude oil prices. But at some point you have to abandon before you'd want to. You're not making money. We have a pretty serious winter climate that can challenge things. CO2 is not an easy process, and winter complicates that for people. Our terrain, as you're aware, could be difficult even to get a project in there or drill a well in an optimal location. Our drilling costs, a standard Menalusa well, 8,000 feet, $2 million. That's gone up. You're looking at a $2 million drilling cost for a normal well. That's gone up significantly. There's challenges getting some of the materials, the pipe, et cetera. Again, there's not a lot we can do about that necessarily, but that all affects those economics. And on page 22, I'm going to leave this to the next folks that are coming up to the table, but I did say I would prompt them. We do have, as you know, 78% federal land, and that's a challenge because of regulatory issues, federal. Delays in drilling permits, 2 years on federal. Again, I don't know what we can do about it, but these are federal issues. And the idle well bonding and the requirements for plugging. If you're going into a field, any of these fields you've seen, and you immediately are required to bond, it can knock the project over. They're coming in, again, these are little guys. It doesn't affect the big ones. They may not like it, but they have mechanisms for bonding that a little guy doesn't have. So if you've got wells that you immediately have to plug and abandon or bond, it can be a deal changer. And I know that Joe Corp is going to talk here a little bit about some of the issues in Wyoming. That's all I have, and hopefully that was helpful to give you a little more of the overview. Happy to answer any more questions.
Is there any other questions? Yes, JR. Is your mic on?
The tax rebates. So do all producers, or say in the spectrum of people we're talking about, are they all taking some advantage of the federal tax credits that come with CO2 activity, or some, just the ones who, emitters, or et cetera? What do you know about that?
Mr. Chairman, I think what's important to realize that 45Q, all that is for the capturer only, with ability to transfer or negotiate. Where we would think that negotiation would occur is on the oil price. So if you're capturing and you're getting $85 a ton or 60, I think everyone believed that 45Q would incentivize you to sell for EOR and lower your CO2 costs because you're getting a tax credit back for doing that. So the operator is kind of left out there. They can negotiate with the capturer. In this case, Exxon is our capturer, and there is negotiation that goes on. But that's all legally confidential. I don't have access to that, nor do I ask. But that was, I think, the original intention of 45Q. We're going to incentivize EOR. But they have to see some incentive. I'm not sure they're seeing it.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is quite a little bit different, but you talked about that last process of using NGLs. So I believe there is a nearby producer between Casper and Glenrock that's been using NGL flooding. I think Southwest has been doing. I don't know how successful it's been, but I see these model programs you're talking about, and I think this one is actually underway at some point. I think they've been doing it for a couple of years. So I'm just curious if you're familiar with that process and what they're doing.
Mr. Chairman, not that one specifically, but I think what's been inhibiting NGL EOR or even using that solvent has been the cost per barrel for the NGLs that's finally dropped to what looks to be an economic level for a smaller guy.
No more questions. Thank you.
Other questions? Other questions? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lon, we've talked about this before, and I was wondering about what fields in the state would be the most economically advantageous for the state of Wyoming to end up with a pipeline nearby or directly to. If we were to, kind of from our perspective as the Minerals Committee, try to facilitate a project being located in Wyoming and going into effect to get CO2 where it needs to be, do you have an initial sense of where that would be? Would that be up in the basin? Would that be somewhere else? What would that potentially look like?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very valid question. What's occurred because of the current infrastructure? All your development is Powder River. There's some significantly large projects that are on the table in Powder River, the 300 to 400 million barrel type recoveries. We haven't gone into depth looking at their numbers, but there's some serious projects in development. That's occurred because that's where the pipeline infrastructure exists, or you can get a relatively small spur. But I think it could be very advantageous. We'd be glad to put together an actual, here's the fields you'd want to go after, where you need the pipeline. I'd be glad to put that together.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. go
Lon,
ahead.
and I think that's really what we should look at. And if we could get that put together, even if it's preliminary in the beginning, and then we could dig deeper a little bit later to know, you look back at the Ruby Kern pipeline and the fact that we kind of facilitated it coming into existence by having the legislature through the infrastructure authority at the time, pipeline authority at the time, step in and sort of start that project, and then industry came in and said, oh, this looks very viable, we'll pick it up, and the state didn't end up having to get engaged, and we'll have the energy authority. Rob will be up in a little bit, but this is another great possibility where if it's about capital being deployed and it's a high return on investment deployment of capital, then it's in the state's interest, because we obviously gain from the oil and gas production being in the state of Wyoming, and utilizing our CO2 in the state is essential. So I think it would be very useful for us, and maybe we can do this at the next committee meeting, Mr. Chairman, to understand what that might look like, what those projects might cost, and how we could potentially work through the Energy Authority to facilitate those. And hopefully industry will just come along and pick it up like like happened last time. But honestly, whatever it takes to ensure that we're using our CO2 in the state of Wyoming beneficially for EOR, it's obviously going to, help us pay the bills and keep the economy floating in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, we're glad to put that together.
Good, good. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? I know Representative Campbell doesn't have any because he asked them all. All right, thanks, Lon.
You betcha.
Thank you. And next up is Tom Kropatch with the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission. And Tom looks a little different today.
I am not Tom. I am Tom's not available. My name is Joe Scott with the Oil and Gas Commission. Tom is unavailable today, so he gave me the esteemed opportunity to present in front of this committee, which I have not had the pleasure of before. But Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I'm going to go through the regulatory side of enhanced oil recovery, and I think I have a presentation. Perfect. I'm going to skip ahead to slide 4 slide 4, because Lon covered the first 3 much better than I could have, so I'm going to let the expert lean on that one. So the Oil and Gas Commission, 2 main involvements with enhanced oil recovery. One is unitization done under statute 35-110, and that's to create the units in which these operate, and then all the injection wells are done under our rules, under Chapter 4 of our rules. The other things, we obviously do APDs, we permit well work, transfers, that'll come up later in bonding, and all the plugging and, all the associated work. Moving to the next slide, unitization, essentially if you're going to do this usually happens at secondary. Some people obviously jump right into enhanced oil recovery, but at that secondary phase is where people unitize. They have a primary field that's been produced, and each of the wells are sort of grouped in smaller groups that are sharing in costs and revenue. And so when you move to unitization, when you move to water flood, you're going to push that oil across various lease lines and operate it for the greater good of the whole, everybody in the project. And so the operators will come in and perform unitization in front of the commission. This will also typically involve a BLM process. As you know, we have lots of federal acreage in Wyoming. If it lips over 10% of the project, the BLM rules say that the unit agreement has to be in a BLM format. And so they'll typically parallel our process and have signed off essentially before it gets to the commission or if committed to sign off. In order to unitize, you have to get 80% sign up from both the working interest and the royalty interest in the unit. That usually that can be a long process. As you can imagine, everybody thinks that the oil is under their property, and there are extensive formulas that determine how everybody shares in the costs and revenue. And so all the sources of contention we've seen in front of the commission have been due to arguments over those formulas as to who gets paid what. That doesn't typically cause a delay between secondary and so if somebody was in a water flood and they were going to CO2, all of that has already been hashed out. And so that transition is a lot easier.
Is that what you're saying, that it should not add regulatory delay?
That's correct. Moving from water flood to CO2 is typically a very easy process. It's administrative in nature to change your injectate fluid source with us. The hard parts are all outside of the regulatory process generally. So moving to slide 6, underground injection control. We operate underground injection under a primacy program from EPA in 1983. We've been doing that as the Class 2 program. DEQ operates the other classes, but Class 2 is all the oil and gas related injection and disposal wells that cover your enhanced recovery elements. And the point at which you need to work through EPA comes at the beginning, when you first go from primary to secondary. If you're going to inject things into the ground, you have to go through a process called the aquifer exemption process. There are sort of two routes. One is that your water is fairly salty. The cutoff is 10,000 total dissolved solids milligrams per liter. And if you're above that, it's not considered an underground source of drinking water, and you can just move on without the EPA piece. If you're under that, you have to get an exemption from EPA, which means we're going to go through our process, have a hearing, write an order, and then we're going to send that whole package up to EPA in accordance with our primacy agreement, and they're going to concur. Under the last administration, that process was strained and highly time-consuming. Now, not so much, because one of the esteemed alumni from this committee is now a Region 8 administrator, and since his arrival on scene, timelines have dropped precipitously. Not sure how he did that, but I do know that it happened. So, yeah, again, the change to CO2, when we change the CO2, we're really looking at, is the metallurgically appropriate for injecting a new fluid type and have the pressures change? So again, fairly easy. Moving on to slide 7. The delays you get to, I talked about the aquifer exemption process and how that's sort of alleviated for the most part into a manageable timeline. But there's a lot of process that goes in with converting a field, especially to CO2. You've got to get the pipeline there, and you've got long lead items. You've got lots of tubing, and your pipelines might not be equipped to handle CO2. It's when a lot of our floods are water alternating gas. When you mix CO2 and water, you get a highly corrosive substance, and so a lot of your standard metallurgies won't work. There's also, when you go to secondary, we're gonna increase the reservoir pressure. And so one of the things that we have to look at is there a well that's gonna be affected that has an issue that might create a pathway for that injected fluid to go into a different zone, particularly of concern, an underground source of drinking water that might contaminate something. So as we look at that, sometimes there are wells that need to be replugged. If you think about some of our older fields where they were drilled a very long time ago, Salt Creek being the most pointed example, where they had to replug an untold number of wells. I haven't counted them, but wells in those days may have been plugged with telephone poles. And certainly most of our fields experience a lot better than that, but there still can be issues getting in and repairing wells and identifying all those and doing well work. The other thing, Lon teed it up, is the other place we can run into the feds. Some of these are federal wells, and on the well work side, the BLM's fairly decent to work with. But if one has to get a pipeline from A to B and cross federal ground, that triggers a right-of-way process, which, if it's significant enough, can trigger NEPA and all sorts of delays in that realm. So it depends where your project is, but that can cause significant delays. Moving on to slide 8, talk about the factors affecting the ability. Well bonds. So this comes up particularly, well, I'll talk about instance, I'll go over some basics at first. The Oil and Gas Commission, under statutory authority, collects bonds. We collect bonds that serve to cover plugging liability, and they're all compliance bonds. Pretty much, except for our pit bonds, all of our bonds at the Oil and Gas Commission are compliance bonds to ensure bonds to ensure compliance with our rules. So when an operator comes in, our blanket bond is $100,000, and then their idle well bonding. On top of that, if they have more idle wells, then they may be required to submit additional. And that is where a company coming in that is looking at a field that was on primary, and they want to go to secondary, a lot of times as that tapered off and the primary production wells were shut in. And so it may have a significant amount of idle wells in it when another operator comes to pick it up. And so there can be a significant bonding attached to that. So moving on to slide 9, when the Oil and Gas Commission goes to plug orphan wells, if we have an operator that is not following the rules and we bring them into a hearing and decide that they're not going to be able to follow the rules and we orphan them, then we forfeit their bonds, and those bonds are available to plug wells. The rest of the money spent plugging wells, except for some recent federal dollars in the BIL Act, for the most part, we've plugged it with conservation taxes. So I want to temper the word taxpayer on slide 9, because when we say taxpayer, we mean operators who are paying conservation taxes, not the general public. That means the oil and gas conservation is funded by fees and primarily a conservation tax, which is a very small tax on production. But that is the pool of money that we go use to plug orphan wells when the bonds are insufficient, which they frequently are. So that idle well bonding helps us manage that amount that other operators who are not orphaned are essentially covering through the conservation taxes. As we know, orphan wells are a big topic now. I think in Wyoming, we do a pretty darn good job getting on the wells and getting them plugged so they don't create some of the hazards that you see in other states, frankly. Recently, for a moment, we had every well under contract to plugged, and then we had a couple subsequent orphanings, so we're still contracting and plugging wells, but I think we do a great job staying on top of that.
Question here, Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, I know we've done very well with orphan wells. Do you have a number of, how many orphan wells do we actually call orphan wells do we have in the state right now? I know it's not very many compared to other states, but.
Yeah, it's a floating number because there's a couple pending, but I think it's about 1,000 right now. Okay. Although I have another big chunk of coal bed coming out of a bankruptcy that will add 1,400, but we have contracts pending to plug most of the ones I think we'll put out those contracts very soon to plug most of the ones that are on the list today. And then I've got another chunk coming that I think is about another 1,000.
Mr. Chairman?
14.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the conservation tax, how much is in the corpus for this conservation tax? And realizing that the bond, when they forfeit the bond, that covers most of the cost of plugging the well, but as a backstop, we have the conservation tax. How much is in that corpus right now?
I don't have that answer, but I'd be happy to follow up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so moving on to slide 10, as you guys well know, legislation was passed last session to create bonding pools. The Oil and Gas Commission is in process of creating those rules. I think we hope to kick off that rulemaking progress in the June hearings. And that hopefully will try to address one of the main barriers, which is when somebody's coming in, like Lon talked about, all the upfront capital that is required to start one of these projects. So when companies come in and they're looking at it, and the bond is significant, and a bonding company looks at that company and decides that they need to post X amount of collateral. Well, that a lot of times has to be tied up in a somewhat of a cash format. And so companies are not able to use that capital to work on the project and produce the incremental oil. So the bonding pool is designed to help with that capital outlay where the pool developed under the statute and the rules will be able to serve as the capital that they would otherwise have to tie up to get access a bond. We're hoping that this will provide a little bit of help to companies and be able to get capital on the ground faster and get to more oil faster. The bonding market is changing. I just got calls yesterday even about people having more trouble accessing bonds. That is continuing fallout from an offshore bankruptcy where some sureties felt like they got left holding the bag. I think it remains to be seen how that plays out, but I think that makes the bonding pool more important as the surety markets become more risk averse and increase the capital requirements to access those sureties. And I've had operators describe that they're in better financial position than they were 3 years ago when they tried to acquire a bond. And now the capital core requirement is actually higher due to this thing that happened offshore that's totally out of our control.
So a question on that. Is part of that because there's fewer people wanting to bond energy projects, or is that pretty stagnant, that it's the same people that are bonding?
We've seen some exits. I've seen some major surety companies that are reluctant or have stopped writing sureties. It's hard to tell because those effects lag so much. Companies that acquired a surety years ago will still have it. So I think I have lots of surety companies on the books today, but it's hard to, I think it's really hard to say what that looks like going forward. And it's not a conversation I'm always in.
Okay, thank you.
So the Oil and Gas Commission, one of the other ways that we address this is through plans. Our rules allow us to accept plans of an operator in lieu of a bond. So,
Question, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, directors. Thank you, Joe. We just passed Senate File 120? Just 20, okay, last year to address these orphan and bonding issues. I never considered how other states, so even though Wyoming has taken measures to address this, how are we affected by companies that are in Wyoming? We've covered our bases. How are those companies affected by the policies of other states that they do business in? How does that reflect on us? Does that make sense?
yeah, thank you for the question. I hate to get through a presentation without a question from Representative Campbell, but I have not seen any effects. I have not had operators report effects from other states that affect their operations here. That's not to say it doesn't happen. I'm just not aware of it, if it does. So the Oil and Gas Commission can accept plans in lieu of bonding. And what that looks like, I'll use TR Operating that we talked about before. They're actively pursuing and have shown meaningful progress towards a CO2 project for some time. So we have used that plan and their continued progress towards that plan in lieu of overburdening them with bonding requirements on their current assets. So that happens for most companies who have idle well bonding with us, have delivered us some sort of plans that have mitigated that. And we track those plans year over year to ensure that a company doesn't tell us they're going to plug the well next month for 3 years in a row. We tend to, as a former supervisor, and used to always beat into us, trust but verify. So I think we're responsible with that authority to watch companies year over year and see if they do what they say they're going to do. But that has allowed us some flexibility to deal with the bonding issue. Moving on to slide 11, other impacts, I touched on it earlier. We really try to help streamline secondary recovery. Enhanced oil recovery meets our statutory mission, like achieving the maximum ultimate recovery of oil is good for us. So we've really tried to work with Region 8, their staff. We've made changes to the way we present data to make it easier for them to review. We've had continued conversations with them and made some pretty good steps at just formatting things or presenting data in a more friendly way to their process. It was difficult in the last 4 years. It's become much less difficult. And I think that we're going to be able to continue to work on these processes to streamline and keep their staff used to our applications and able to streamline that process. But there's only so much you can do. But I would say we've made measurable progress in that regard. And we also work through State UIC Association on a national scale that we aid them in working more nationally on policy issues that could alleviate those issues. Moving on to slide 12. Other processes, we try to work as responsively as we can. So typically, we're pretty good on well work. We ask operators to give us 2 weeks to review sundries, but I would say every single week, we take a call from somebody who had something bad happen, and we have to turn approval around immediately. And we do our best to meet those needs as quickly as possible. And I think we do a pretty good job and keeping operators educated as to what they need approval for and trying to keep open lines of communication as we work through these issues. And then sometimes there's dual regulation, particularly when it comes to injection. So you have a federal well that turns into an injection well. And we then have this sometimes strained dual regulation where it's their well, but we regulate the injection. So over the last number of years, I think we've done a pretty good job developing relationships with BLM personnel, petroleum engineers, AFMs, field managers across the state, so that we can see learn what's important to them, see those issues coming, and be able to just pick up the phone, call the BLM, work it out engineer to engineer, and get a decision to the ground a lot faster. So sometimes there are delays that we can help with or work out the differences instead of us telling the operator who tells a BLM field staff who tells a BLM office staff. We've shortened that connection straight engineer to engineer in a lot of ways and built relationships across the state that I think have really helped to where sometimes we can shorten BLM delays by working with the operator and the BLM. That's really all I had for you today. I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you would have.
Joe, I got a question on that bill that we passed to put the bonding at 100,000. We were thinking that might not be necessary if the BLM changed their rules. Have you seen anything that they might change their rules from the 500,000?
I have not seen anything. I think that's an expectation that's commonly held that will be addressed. I think it's still under pending litigation, the rule that had that in it. So I guess it's hard for me to protect. I do think I think it'll change, but that's just one man's opinion.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily require litigation. They could just change it, couldn't they?
They could change it. I'm saying when the rule was passed, it was sued. And so that litigation is never resolved. I think maybe Mr. Oberbuehler could comment on that. But yes, they could just change the rule too, which would make the litigation irrelevant.
Yeah.
But
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any other questions? Campbell, are you awake down there? You haven't had a question for quite a while. All right, all right. No other questions. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for filling in for Crowpatch. And next up is Pete Obermueller, please, the president of PAW.
Good morning. Morning, Mr. Chairman, committees, committee members. Nice to see you all. This is great fun. We could do this all day. I love this. Appreciate you taking the time. Pete Obermueller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Great presentations from Director Whitman and Deputy Supervisor Scott, so I don't need to repeat a lot of that, just a couple of follow-ups. And perhaps maybe a thought experiment for you all on how to move forward. First of all, let me talk about 45Q, as that's been discussed so far, and what might be happening in DC regarding 45Q. Director Whitman talked about the desire of some to increase 45Q to 120, and that's one possible path. I think it's important to know we had this discussion a lot over the last interim and during the session about about 45Q going away. You will note that in the, because I know you all follow it very closely, the House passed reconciliation bill eliminates a great number of various energy and energy subsidies and those sorts of things. It did not eliminate 45Q. I think that's pretty telling from the U.S. House representatives where they stand on 45Q. So obviously that's a moving target. It may happen, but it's not, at least in the House passed version, it's not going away.
Question.
Mr. Obermueller, thank you. But can you help further explain what you think it means that 45Q was not eliminated? So can you just really spell that out?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Senator Nethercott, I can try. I think it's, yeah, I've got a few of those. Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I mean, I think it is indicative of the broad support that 45Q has as a tool to help incentivize use of CO2. Now, in our case, we'll see how that plays out with Senator Kramer's efforts to try to not only equalize, but also increase. There is a significant amount of interest at the federal level to try to equalize and to try to turn it, as I think the co-chairman used the word productive use. I think there's quite a lot of support of that in the current Congress. But be that as it may, Senator Nethercott, that equalization is not current law. And yet it wasn't repealed by this House, at least in the currently passed House reconciliation bill. Again, it's a moving target. Who knows what will happen out there? But I think it's very illustrative of where they collectively stand on all across the spectrum of populist, conservative, moderate, Democrat.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Certainly.
Thank you. So is it reasonable to conclude that those representatives have heard from industry and their constituents and believe that 45Q, even though it's currently written, isn't acceptable to us and it needs work, but it's more helpful than it is harmful? Is that fair?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think you could surmise that. Still, Mr. Chairman.
Is that your full answer?
Mr. Chairman, unbelievable. I can be succinct on occasion. It's amazing. Mr. Chairman, so I wanted to bring up, if I might, I wanted to bring up 45Q in part to talk about two things related to this topic, which I believe was the committee wanted to look at. And I know the co-chairman, we've talked about this a lot. we passed the bill related to the price of CO2 and helping to drive down that price of CO2, and you've already brought that up. And lots of these of you on this committee are interested in, well, what else could move the needle more? And I'll get to that in a second. Let me just say, with respect to what we currently have in trying to equalize and send CO2 for productive uses, it's novel. We're the first ones to try it. And I think, Mr. Chairman, a metric that we can all look at to see whether it's working is whether my members who do enhanced oil recovery projects tell me that it's making a difference in their contracts for the price of CO2. I think that's something that we can follow over time, but it's going to take time. But I think it's important for the committee to know that that map that Director Whitman had up there that showed the pipeline that goes from the southwest to the northeast and hits the border right around where Representative Tarver stomps around and causes trouble, the pipeline doesn't plug there. Where does that pipeline go? It goes to North Dakota. And, Mr. Chairman, they just released a report very, very recently, and I'm just going to read you very briefly this part. Maybe. Yeah, I am. North Dakota offers several tax incentives to promote CO2 EOR. Key provisions include tax exemptions for incremental oil from qualifying projects with different durations depending on location, et cetera. The state incentivizes infrastructure by offering sales and use tax exemptions for materials involved in CO2 transport, storage, or injection for enhanced oil recovery. CO2 pipeline projects are exempt from property taxes during constructions and for the first 10 years of operation. Sales of CO2 used for EOR or geological storage are exempt from sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. The report estimates that North Dakota took a little bit of different tack than Wyoming did. They don't try to eliminate that $25 differential, but it offsets about 65% of the differential in terms of their tax credits. The reason for bringing that up is the CO2 source in Wyoming is going to get used for EOR somewhere. And North Dakota is pitching for our CO2.
We have a question.
I am happy to take it.
Thank you,
Senator
Chairman.
Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Omermeyer. We just passed House Bill 131 this last session, so we haven't had an opportunity to see the effects of that. Doesn't that kind of fall in line with along what you're talking about, where we carved out so many exemptions for new manufacturing equipment? Doesn't that fall in line with what we're talking about here, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I wish I had a steel trap for remembering bill numbers. I don't know what HB 131. You'll have to tell me what that is.
Just 1 second, Pete.
I don't know either.
It's House Bill 131.
Mr. Chairman, is that
Yeah. While you're calculating that, Representative Tarver is going to ask another question. We can stump him.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Pete, thanks, and good to see you. So basically what you're saying is North Dakota's coming for our CO2. So if we don't get actively engaged in keeping our CO2 and putting it forth in our own fields, we're going to maybe miss the boat here. Is that what you're kind of implying?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, that is what I'm implying. It's not, I'm not implying it, I'm saying it outright. I often feel like in this job that I'm trying to just personally and get Wyoming to chase North Dakota and get us up to speed to the kind of thing they do. This past legislative session, you all put us in front of North Dakota, and they're looking at us on what we did both on bonding and on the CO2 stimulus that you all passed. All of a sudden, everyone's turning their attention to us, which is great. I love that. There's more that we can do, I think, to stay ahead of North Dakota, and I would love to do that.
Representative Campbell, do you have your question figured out?
Yeah, it's House Bill 11 that,
Still doesn't help me, Mr. Chairman.
sales and use tax exemption, Pete.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, I don't remember the specifics of the sales and use tax exemption, who it
Okay,
applied
well,
to,
basically,
but-
all new manufacturing in, I believe, oil and gas, would be classified as new manufacturing, to where there would be an exemption on this until, I believe it's 2042.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is, my question is, we have not seen the results of this bill yet. So I'm just wondering if you have factored this in anywhere.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, yeah, I appreciate that. And let me just, you're right, it's just too early to tell, and it's not just limited to that particular bill. This past legislature, for the first time in my time at BAW, passed significant tax relief for the oil and gas industry. Not just that one. There are others that were very, very meaningful. And it'll take time to get there. And it's actually, Mr. Chairman, it's a perfect segue in terms of significant tax relief and all that to talk about what I want to talk about next, which is you saw the numbers from Director Whitman. It's big, big numbers. The bills we passed, you all passed this last session, they're all part of what needs to be a multifaceted approach if we really, as a state, want to get behind building infrastructure, not just oil and gas infrastructure, but infrastructure writ large. And if we're going to move the needle beyond what the commodity price is, and actually draw investment attention, I would just suggest to the committee that we have to think really big about it. And here's what I mean by really big. Again, to the theme of chasing North Dakota. North Dakota is the only state that has a state bank, the Bank of North Dakota. And I've talked with not all of you, I've talked with several of you individually when we talk about the investments that the treasurer manages and all that, about how do we direct investments to Wyoming projects? Well, North Dakota is doing it with the Bank of North Dakota. I don't know if my friend, Mr. Meyer with the Banking Association is watching. If not, he's probably feeling a disturbance in the force. It's important to know that the Bank of North Dakota partners with commercial banks and uses the full faith and credit of the state to help back commercial banks that do these projects. They started out as kind of exclusively agriculture. They do infrastructure projects now and all of that. There is a way, I think, to invest in these super expensive projects that Director Whitman talked about, and that is modeled by another state right now. Would that be easy? No way. And I'm not prepared to even suggest to you how we would go about doing it. But if the committee wanted to think big, we could go down that project. You've already started to do that with respect to the energy matching funds, and I don't want to speak for Director Krieger. I know he's talking here in a minute, but related to your your conversations about directing investments to specific projects. You all know, I mean, it's no secret, during the legislative session, I spent a ton of time banging my spoon on my high chair defending the energy matching program. Committee, did you realize that the language in statute that guides the energy matching program does not list oil and gas as one of the specific things to invest in? All the oil and gas investment on the large energy matching funds is in the and other category. So Director Krieger is looking at what the legislature directed him to do and has to make decisions based on that. Now, to his great credit, most of it went to oil and gas related projects. But Mr. Chairman, what if that program served as a launching pad for doing something more like Senator Roth was talking about, Senator Nethercott was talking about more specifically directed infrastructure projects in a model similar to what North Dakota does? That's my thought experiment for you all. Happy to take questions.
Any questions for? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermueller, first of all, I'll just note we spent some time on the blockchain select committee looking at the North Dakota Bank, and that is a bit of a Herculean lift to try and get Wyoming into. I think there's some upside to it and some challenges. But from the model that they use, do you know if they end up, when they're investing, is it an equity investment? And are they able to make a direct equity investment in a project? Or are they doing subsidized lending? How are they getting funds into the hands of whoever is developing the project? Because obviously for us, that's often complicated.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, I'm not equipped to answer detailed questions about how the Bank of North Dakota operates. They have several different loan programs. Most of them still are directed towards agriculture than energy. In the midst of a conversation with my colleagues in North Dakota about which energy companies have used it and for what purpose and how it's worked and all of that. But I didn't want to chase down that rabbit hole too far if you all were just like, well, that's cool, but no.
Yes, go ahead.
It seems that the tool we have is the industrial bonds, the revenue bonds out of the Energy Authority is what we actually have on the books at this point in time. Rob's out, he's walking in right now, and now he knows I'm talking about him, so that becomes challenging. He runs away, good. It seems like that's our most directly addressable vehicle to achieve the same thing, where what we want to do is we want to bring capital to large projects where that capital isn't necessarily finding its way there. And then through our investment of capital in that market, we actually can attract additional capital because once the project starts up, we start having the potential. Do you see any shortcomings of that model or anything that we should be working on there so that we can achieve the same objectives that they're doing in North Dakota?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, the biggest shortcoming of it is nobody's using it. So it clearly isn't meeting the need. And perhaps it's just the bond rates. I think that's part of it. But maybe it needs an entire structural rework that makes it more effective. Perhaps something on, look, we've just spent all that time with all of your help creating that bonding pool program. Maybe there's something else we can do there with respect to infrastructure that allows for reinvestment of the taxes that we pay back into infrastructure that helps continue to generate this cycle. I don't know the answer to that. I do, but I think apart from that, you mentioned it, the Ruby pipeline, I believe, which was an interesting, maybe unique case. It hasn't helped.
Other questions? Other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Lolly, yes, Representative Lolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to rewind us back a bit, but I always hate to interrupt Mr. Obermuller when he's making great points. So I want to go back to the 45Q and just maybe highlight some points that were being made earlier as we try to read the tea leaves about 45Q. And I think I'm correct on this, but Mr. Obermuller, you could certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but the 45Q credit originated in the first Trump administration's tax policy. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think Director Whitman might know the history better than me. I don't think it originated under the first Trump administration. It was around before that. It got expanded significantly under the first Trump administration.
Yeah, thank you. That would have been a better choice of words. So I think that gives us a little bit of a clue in terms of whether or not it's going to go away, because it was significantly expanded in the first Trump administration. So for those who might be hoping for its quick demise, I'm not so sure that the tea leaves are reading that way. But anyway, thank you.
Yes, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermuller, thank you for being here again. We have in Wyoming a world-class CO2 source. It's been producing for 40 years now, and it's still free-flowing with no compression. I don't think Exxon has figured out how big that reservoir is yet. It may extend all the way to Jackson. It's just a huge world-class source of CO2. And recently, we've seen in the news that there's another company wanting to build another plant out of that same source of CO2, primarily for the methane or the helium, but they would re-inject the CO2. So what I'm getting at, Pete, or Mr. Obermuller, we don't really need to compete with North Dakota for the CO2. We have plenty for everyone to go around. The issue is getting it to where it needs to be utilized. And that's where I have been trying to focus for a couple of years now. How do we get this product to market? Because it's easier just to re-inject it in the ground and not get any benefit from it. But we have a need for it to get to these aging oil fields, not only in Wyoming, but North Dakota and throughout the Intermountain West. But how do we help develop that infrastructure so that we can utilize that CO2 to increase our oil production and increase our energy independence in America with that world-class CO2 source that we have?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, yeah, thank you. And I should have been more clear when I was talking about North Dakota. It's not about competing for the CO2 molecules themselves. It's competing for where it goes and what it's used for. And if North Dakota is going to close 65% of the gap with tax credits, we did it a different way, but we're in the mix. So let me just clarify that point. And I appreciate that's your question is precisely what I think this topic is trying to tackle. And what I'm suggesting is that we're not going to get there unless we take some pretty bold action. I don't know if a Bank of North Dakota option is the right approach. Maybe there's something else with the treasurer's office that we could work out here. You've already heard about the pipeline, so I don't need to necessarily get there. But there are other, if we look at the Bighorn Basin, there are other challenges that perhaps some program like this could help to develop more oil from legacy fields. I think it was mentioned that it's basically a water management problem in the Oregon Basin and in the Bighorn Basin in general. There are infrastructure challenges for dealing with that, and we could help the Bighorn Basin develop more of their resources if we focus it on that. Perhaps it is a per basin effort. The Powder River Basin has a different challenge than the Bighorn Basin does. But that's I guess that's what I'm trying to convey, Mr. Chairman, is I don't think Senator Rothfuss and I have gone round and round about tax policy. And I won't bore you all to tears again with my general speech about Wyoming's tax policy. I won't do it. But he's right in this one minor sense, tiny, insignificant sense, that it's not the only thing. It's not the only thing, the tax policy. There has to be more to it. We passed one. Let's think about passing another, which might be a more targeted energy matching fund, or it might be something bigger than that. But it has to be bold if it's going to move the needle, or it won't overcome challenges from competition with private land states and commodity prices.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman? Sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Obermuller, we know that the trunk line north or south to north is constrained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We would like to expand that, but if North Dakota needs CO2 and they want to expand the utilization of CO2, maybe rather than going at it all by our onesies, maybe we need to have a collaborative approach, utilizing the resources that North Dakota already has in place, and work together to come up with a way to expand that trunk line so that not only can meet our needs in the future, but also North Dakota's needs in the future. So maybe we need to work with our partners up there, and they can help us expand that trunk line and the capacity, and it would be a win-win for everyone at the table.
Wouldn't you agree?
Wouldn't
Yeah,
you agree?
I mean, Mr. Chairman, if you're asking me to lay down my competitive, be North Dakota at all costs attitude, that's going to be hard for me. But no, I'm kidding. I'm happy to work with them on it. I mean, our two states are probably the most similar in the oil and gas space, which is why we collaborate a lot and we're competitive. And quite frankly, we trade the workforce. We trade everything on oil and gas, so it makes a lot of sense.
Any other questions? Any other questions for Mr. Obermuller? Other questions? No, hearing none. Thank you, Pete. Thanks for being with us
Thank you, Mr.
today.
Chairman. Appreciate the time.
For your presentation. We have a few minutes for public comment. You're going to have to hold it down quite a bit because our schedule for 11 o'clock with the Wyoming Energy Authority. So could I open it up to public comment, please? Public comment, public comment, public comment. Seeing none, excuse me.
Good evening, committee. Rosemary Saban, a Trona County resident. I guess I'd like it on record that there's some concerns with these CO2 pipelines for myself. I did work in the oil and gas industry, fracking. And there is communication that happens. The field that y'all are talking about out at Lysite happens frequently. So when CO2 mixes with water, it produces carbonic acid. In certain formations, it can break down and cause swelling, and it can be detrimental to aquifers, just basic. So if we're pumping all of this in the ground, there's concerns that need to be mitigated so that we're not doing damage. The cost burden on the people, I just wrote this down while I was thinking, that this constant need to grow and consume more and more at any cost, at any burden, what's the end goal? Who wins this game? Because right now, I think there's a lot of people around the state that feel our boots are filled with empty political promises. And we can talk about property tax relief, and I'm sure that we're going to spin this, that if we can have all of these wonderful things, CO2, nuclear, any of the above, that we're going to get property tax relief. So I guess to speak to the people of Wyoming, my sentiments and my attitude on this is the people need to be doing some log rolling. We need to hold you guys accountable that we get taken care of before whatever the game is and who's going to be king. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions.
Some questions.
Thank you for your comments and your courage to speak. It's not clear to me what your concerns are. I heard at the beginning that you have experience in the industry. So you worked for an oil and gas company here in Wyoming.
And North Dakota.
And North Dakota. Sounds like that's how it goes. But I'm just curious as to, is your primary concern water resource?
Yes, water's a big one in Wyoming.
Is that your primary concern, or is your primary concern?
The health and safety, because that is the government's objective, or supposed to be, is the health and safety and welfare of the people.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up on that. Are you aware of any concerns of any aquifers being contaminated or damaged as a result of any of these projects?
I am not currently, but if we continue to inject more and more and more, I could go into great detail with you, Mrs. Nethercott, but working for Halliburton and doing testing and designing of fluid systems, I know what's in those fluid systems. I know what they were pumping in North Dakota. And if we were talking about one well in one town across the United States, not a big deal, but we're talking about set points of 10 gallons per 1,000 on chemicals. Yes, sir.
Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. I'm trying to envision your question here too. Is the concern with the actual components of the CO2 in that mixture, or are you concerned with the acidic effects as far as like eating the limestones, eating the actual structure of the formation to where we're expanding upon the aquifer type? I'm just want to clarify, are we actually talking about contamination, or are we talking about destruction of the aquifer itself from the chemicals?
It would have to be both, to be honest, depending upon what is in the CO2 and what it will do to the formations, and then what it would do to people's private wells and the, the hydrostatic components of this, water tables holding up other water tables. I grew up in Sheridan, and the coal bed methane, not to get too far off in the weeds, but it was, pumping, they were told you can utilize this water, and it sterilized ground. When they pulled that water off, it's bad water. And then secondly, out in the Parkman area and even Story, Wyoming, hand-dug wells and the water tables started shifting and dropping. So I think that this really needs to be taken carefully. Don't just look at the dollar signs and what it's going to provide, but really think hard about the irreversible damages that can occur.
Mr. Chairman.
Clarify?
Question here, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am,
Yes,
I
sir.
heard two different things from you there. When you started out, you mentioned the CO2 pipelines, and then you switched over to frac fluids. The two are not related.
Oh,
Can you kind of elaborate what you're talking about there? Because enhanced oil recovery with the CO2 is not related to the frac fluids that you were just discussing.
I will thank you kindly because I did lose my train of thought on the CO2 pipelines. My other concern with CO2 pipelines is the eminent domain. And I don't know if it's coincidental or what's going on, but Cowboy State Daily had an article April 22nd about eminent domain and the fights that's going on in South Dakota and Iowa. And there was two bills passed last session that would have prevented eminent domain from being utilized. So that's another concern, that people have their properties confiscated, stolen, so that we can have more pipelines.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Oh, Representative Campbell has a question.
I just, no, Ms. Vaughn, thank you very much. I just wanted to go back on Director Whitman when he was talking in there, that was one of the things that they're going to do with this program is because it's so new, we're going to have to monitor. So addressing, I'm thinking, if I'm hearing your concern right, the state will be addressing that because as this field charges, as you know, they build up the enhanced abilities, any erosion, I don't know what else how to say it, any acid destruction or anything like that, I would think that as they're studying how the formation is being charged, that they would be able to study any detrimental effects at the same time. So I just think that the state should make notice of that to where we can kill two birds and one stone at the same time. I think that would be in our best fiscal interest. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing that we the state of Wyoming led on was baseline water testing for fracking. That was something that North Dakota was not doing. This was in 2011, I think, that we started that, maybe 2012, first in the country, and put forward a very good policy to ensure that we weren't suffering from in North Dakota, and I think that's been very successful. I'm not sure that baseline water testing comes into play if we're doing enhanced oil recovery with a CO2 flood. It may or it may not, and it's something I guess I'll check in with our commission and find out, but it's something that could probably be easily implemented, and that would provide a lot of, I think, protection for the concerns. Is that something that sounds like it would be a positive? Again, we did that for fracking. The rest of the country actually was regulated to effectively come close to our standards. I still don't think the rest of the country does as well as the state of Wyoming on fracking standards, but the feds, to a large degree, mirrored what we have. Are you familiar with that policy? Is that something that you think would be helpful as we're looking at enhanced oil recovery with CO2, where we're pressurizing a reservoir, and your concern is that there might be connectivity with a nearby reservoir that's a drinking water source?
I think it's absolutely something that should be considered. And I guess more than anything, my purpose is to hopefully the people of Wyoming will attend these meetings and speak out and start. There's so many projects, and I'm not going to take up a bunch of your time, but there's so many things coming at us that the people need to be involved. They need to research these, they need to testify, they need to bring their concerns to you guys so that you can do a job legislating bills for all of us.
Sure, well, Mr. Chairman, I'll look into that, and I appreciate the comments.
Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you. Thank you. That public comment took 8 minutes. We have time for a short public comment. If we have another one, I'd entertain one more. We don't have one? Okay, all right, we'll close public comment. And committee directives, do we have some directives for the LSO on this? I don't think we did we? Yes, sir.
I think the one thing for follow-up with Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute is to try and explore more what projects we would be doing. And it sounds like right now, Lon and the EOR, I can cover that for next meeting, and then maybe we can take action on it next time. But I think it's something that's important for us to try and find a vehicle, as Mr. Obermuller was saying, so that we can provide the investment to facilitate whatever projects are prioritized.
Okay, yeah, yes, Representative Tarver.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And can we broaden that lawn a little bit and address the concerns that the young lady that just presented? And can you give us some more information on, have we ruined aquifers? Is there potentials to ruin aquifers, et cetera, et cetera? Could you also give us a briefing on that at the next meeting and kind of expand on her concerns?
All right, it's now 11 o'clock, and we will move right on to Wyoming Energy Authority.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, Rob.
Members of the committee, my name is Rob Krieger. I serve as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority. LSO is passing out our little slide deck to you all, so I'll give them a little bit of time to do that. First, just want to say appreciate the time to walk through a little bit of an update on the authority as a whole, but as well as obviously a lot of discussion today around financing and some project incentives we can maybe do, and some of the stuff we've done in the past. I know this is going to sound like a broken record to some of you that have been around, but for some of the newer members, I just want to talk about the Energy Authority a little bit and when it was stood up. So back in 2019, there was a bill, and you heard earlier reference the Pipeline Authority. There was a bill that merged the Pipeline Authority, Infrastructure Authority, and State Energy Office into what is now the Wyoming Energy Authority. So we obviously took on those scopes. We also had scopes added to our statute. I think the simple way to look at the Energy Authority is almost a state of Wyoming's Department of Energy like entity. One thing that's unique about us is that we are a quasi-entity. So I answer to a board of directors. That board of directors is appointed by the governor, 7 of which are voting members, and they represent industry. So I have 3 members on my board from the coal patch, 2 from oil and gas, 1 from the utility space, and 1 from the renewable patch as well. As I mentioned earlier, we were designed and sort of set up to help advocate and really facilitate Wyoming's energy production. As you guys know, our energy far expands from our borders. So we focus big time on what are those markets doing, what are those markets wanting, and how do we make sure Wyoming stays in the lead and produces a product that those consumers are going to want to buy. Something that we do as well is really connect the state policy and federal policy with some of our private sector folks here in the state. I have to just point out, we have an annual energy summit that I know some of you attended, and that's really taken off over the last few years. We had our 4th annual this year, at 400 people there from all sorts of industries. So it was really a good group of folks from oil and gas to coal to nuclear to uranium, you name it. There was a whole slew of folks, and I think a really good ability for them to really collaborate and talk about what other industries are up to. We are very small, so if we want to jump to the next slide here, you'll see that we have 8 people. We are one of the smallest energy offices in the country. I'll just note our friends to the south, Colorado, have over 60 people. But I know that sounds daunting, but I really like to picture us as a hub. Something I think government does too often is reinvent a wheel. We try to make sure we don't do that, and you heard about that a little bit this morning with EORI. We also have great partnerships with School of Energy Resources and other entities around the state to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel, that we are making sure and using our experts and other agencies that, that focus on more specific areas. Next slide is our energy landscape. I know this isn't news to any of you all on this committee, but I still think it's worth noting. We continue to be #1 in coal production, top 10 in oil and gas, but those markets have changed over the years. As you know, we also are leading in trona, uranium. We've seen some more mines come on board in the uranium patch, which is exciting. We also have a lot on the rare earth front, which I know we don't have on the agenda necessarily this meeting, but maybe at future we could talk about. There's really 3 big mines that are looking at developing and more importantly, processing those rare earths here in the state of Wyoming. As you all know, mining rare earths isn't necessarily the difficult part. It's processing that, and that's where China has a huge stronghold. So there's some possibilities here in the state of Wyoming for that. One of the realities and one of the things that we really focus on at the Energy Authority, like I said earlier, is the markets. And if we want to go to the next slide, what we are showing here is that.
Question here, Rob.
Yes.
Rob, sorry to interrupt you, but renewable, non-combustible, is that hydropower on that last slide?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, as you'll see on this slide, this is, I know a lot of you already know this, but I think it's important for folks to understand what we are seeing happening that's really outside of our control in some instances. So if we look at that top picture of the United States, that was back in 2001. Over 30 states in this country, their main source of electric generation came from coal. As you all know, majority of that coal came from here in Wyoming. If you look at 2023, that has shifted to about 10 states that have that majority being coal. That's obviously concerning for us when we talk about jobs and revenues, as well as power security for other folks. But that's something we keep front of mind when we talk about the potential for coal in other states as well as other countries. How can we address concerns that some of these entities or states might have, and why have they moved from coal? Majority of it is because of the emissions. Is there a way we can tackle that so they don't have that sort of piece to fall back on? Because again, as we see massive loads of electricity increasing from data centers and manufacturing, there's only a handful of baseload power sources, one of which is coal, as you all know. So we're trying to make sure to the best we can that coal has a bright future in front of us. But I do think it's important. I often say that something we try to be at the Energy Authority is an honest broker. And I think this is a piece of that folks do need to understand what's taking place outside of, a little bit outside of our control. The next slide, I talked about a little bit the growth. I know Chairman Knapp for the Corporations Committee, this is going to be a broken record again, but we had a meeting a couple weeks ago. We're working on some electricity issues that the state is facing regarding large load and third-party generation as we see these new loads come on. But I think a bright spot in that is, again, the opportunity that coal could have. I would point to our largest utility. If you look at their most recent IRP, they rolled back or got rid of a lot of their retirement dates on their coal plants here in the state of Wyoming. So hopefully we can continue that and possibly build more to meet these loads. Something that the Energy Authority also does is we're, as I said, the State Energy Office. This is a federal program. So back in the 1970s, when there was really a pinch for energy, they stood up the Energy Efficiency Program. It's funded by DOE. We administer that program. It's a small dollar compared to when we talk about the matching funds and those sort of things. But really the goal of that fund is to help our county buildings, our school districts and small businesses to help with their electricity bills. And we do that by retrofitting some of their light bulbs, changing the LED, those sort of things to be more efficient to help bring down their energy bills. So that program has been going on, as I said, since the 70s, but that is something that the Energy Authority also manages. The interim work.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
That's an incredible statistic there, the 456% increase. And yet our grid has accommodated that with what we have. to 128 gigawatt?
Mr. Chairman, those are projections. Yeah, so I think a good way to look at it, I think our friends at Rocky Mountain Power point this out a lot, but they're, I think, roughly about a gigawatt, sorry, in the state of Wyoming, and that took 100 years to build that infrastructure out. When we look at these projections here from 23 gigawatts to 128 is what's projected, very quickly. I mean, these are massive undertakings that are going to have to take place, but something, again, that we're focused on.
Wow. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Krager, Director Krager, I wasn't aware of this energy audit program that you're administrating, and that's federal dollars you mentioned?
Correct.
Is that mostly LED lights, or are we helping to put solar panels on some of these municipalities and schools, or what? Is it just lights is all we're doing?
Mr. Chairman, good question. Nope, it's not just lights. We don't put solar panels. There's things like HVAC systems, increasing their wiring. So how it works is essentially a small business would come to us in an application period and say that they want to do this audit on their building to see if there are means for energy efficiency. So we would select them. Again, this is fully federally funded. Then we would go do that audit. That audit would come back and say, either new light bulbs or new HVAC system would help decrease their energy costs by X, Y, or Z, and then we would implement that. But this doesn't stand up like generation, like solar or anything like that.
Follow up?
Yes, go ahead.
So a lot of your customers, it looks like, are government customers, municipalities and school districts. So anybody could make that request. Are the dollars tied to those requests? Are they grants that you have to go out and obtain, or is it every year you get a certain amount of money that you can allocate out?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. It is a formula funded base that comes to the state of Wyoming. And correct, there's a lot of city buildings, but there's also, this is the Y-Light program. There's the other programs that do, there's one for churches, there's one for small businesses that also have been around the state. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll jump to the interim work. We are going to be very busy this interim, which is okay. First thing I would point out is the Senate File 138. As you all know, you passed that this last session. It is really a study. There's not a good source that has numbers for all energy industries, so coal, oil, gas, renewable, nuclear, uranium, you name it, to know what are the severance taxes, what are the job numbers, those sort of things. So you all directed us to do that in Senate File 138. That'll be due October 1st, so I don't remember exactly when your guys' third meeting is, but we might be able to produce that to you guys then. As I mentioned, it's going to be a general overview. One thing that was nice about that bill is you all gave us a little leeway to, you put at a minimum, do the things that you all wanted. So there's also there was some variability for us to look at other things that we thought would be important for the committee as well. So some of the things we'll be doing is breaking it down by region as best we can. When we talk energy production, that was specifically laid out in the bill, as well as each individual type of energy and mineral production. We'll also do a timeline. I think that piece is extremely important as we look at the ebbs and flows of our mineral markets as well. So this will, when talking with folks and who we contracted with, we can actually go back to the 1970s on some of these. So we'll show sort of a graph to see what the production and prices are for different things. Obviously, newer forms of energy won't come on till later, but then specifically called out in the bill is each of the last 5 years specifically. So we'll try to paint that picture from the last 50 years down to the last 5. That'll have the price, the production, as I mentioned, state and local tax contributions, royalty and leases, employment figures, payroll as best we can, and other tangible and intangible economic benefits, which is laid out in the bill. It also asks for us to describe some innovations that have taken place, where we'll try to keep that as brief as we can, but also as detailed. So it's not too much, but there's been a lot over the last, 20, 30 years in the state of Wyoming when you talk innovation, but we're going to do our best to consolidate that for you all. And then I believe Representative Schmid, when we were talking about this in the House Minerals Committee, there was a request to really look at some regulatory impacts on the federal side as best that we could that might be hurting our energy development in Wyoming or helping it. So we're going to be adding that into the study as well. And then lastly will be some of the economic impacts. I know there's a lot of discussion this morning around financing incentives. We're going to do a deep dive into the energy matching funds and some other incentives the state has provided to this point to see, how much has that moved the needle and how helpful has that been. So again, we will get that back to you all on October 1st.
Rob, the reason you don't know when our third meeting is we have not scheduled a third meeting.
Okay.
We've scheduled two-day meetings, and we don't know if we'll do a third meeting. So look at that. I think it's maybe August, our second meeting is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other study that we're doing, which was not legislatively mandated, but we decided to take up, I know a lot of interest is around a really comprehensive study of our coal markets. So I know there's been a lot of talk in the news lately about export potential. That was something that's been, looked at in the past. But we thought it'd be important to do a really holistic view of coal and bring that back to you all as the committee to have as you're looking at new policies. So that'll go over the coal supply, also looking at different moratoriums that have been put in place, whether that was from prior administrations, but also looking at the RMPs. I know there's discussions of those being lifted, but we still think that it's important. While yes, this administration is helpful, as you all know, elections have different outcomes. So just for the future to see if there was another leasing moratorium or those sort of things, just having that information for you all as we look at disputing some of that. We'll also look at the domestic coal demand market, looking at new plants, some of the closures in different states. We'll be looking at other regulatory requirements and bottlenecks that might be taking place at the federal side. And again, the coal demand piece. The other big one is going to be looking at the demand markets for international players. As you all know, the governor went to Japan and Taiwan. I was fortunate enough to join him on that trip to talk about how we can export some of our energy to them. And there was certainly some, most of their interest was in natural gas, but there was also interest in coal as well. So we'll be looking at the evaluation of getting that to them, obviously on the West Coast, but we are going to, in this study, go ahead and look at all options. So if we need to go through Canada or Mexico or even the East Coast, which likely won't have the best economic numbers, but then again, just to have that information for you all going forward. We're going to look at something that I know is top of mind to a lot of you on this committee, and that's the capital investment requirements in coal, and most specifically around carbon capture. We're going to do our best to look at what it would cost to build a new coal plant or a new plant with carbon capture, and more importantly, compare that to, say, a new nuclear facility or a new gas facility or 600 megawatts, say, of wind production, just each one of those, what the costs are, what the investment appetite is, and how the timelines would look out for each of those. Another piece, I'll just briefly touch on Senate File 17. You all obviously know about that, was just discussed. Just want to notify for you all that the bill doesn't allow us to start rulemaking until July 1. So we have meetings lined up to start doing that as quickly as possible. And then I talked a little bit about electricity markets. Again, really focusing on the large load potential and exploring the potential of third-party generation, making sure first and foremost that we have the right regulatory structures in place to make these work, but more importantly, making sure that we are not impacting current ratepayers. If there's a way we can continue to attract, say, data centers or economic growth, but not hurt the current system and structure, that's what we're trying to do. So that'll mainly be a corporations committee thing. But just wanted you all to know that we'll be working on that as well.
Bob, that is an interesting possibility to export some LNG to Japan. Do we have the facilities on the West Coast to do that?
Mr. Chairman, not currently. We are doing a study with the Western States Tribal Nations group that we are a member of. So we have tribes from the West as well as New Mexico and Utah to see if first, do we have the adequate infrastructure to get it from our states to the West Coast. And then at that point, what it would take to get that off the coast of, say, California or Washington. Obviously, you all know that they have a little different view on energy than we do. But I think on gas in particular, it's interesting because they actually consume a heck of a lot of Wyoming gas. So I think if it's good enough for them to use, hopefully they'll be on board with us sending it out of their area as well. But that's something that we'll be looking at as well. Next, I will jump to the energy matching funds, which I know is a topic of discussion.
Oh, wait a minute. Representative Campbell has a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rob. When we're looking at, just real curious, because you were talking about you're going to do a study to compare nuclear, gas, coal. In order to make what kind of criteria are you looking at? Are we looking at cost, how it benefits Wyoming, timelines? Or, I mean, how are we looking to do that to make an apple for an apple?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, that's a good question. Yeah, we'll be looking at the permitting, right? If it's state, federal, we'll be looking at the costs and the investment that other capital markets are looking at doing, but also something like the land impact. Timelines as well, yes, sir. So we'll be looking at all of those things, and again, looking at the acreage that it takes to, say, produce 600 megawatts of power from coal versus nuclear versus whatever it may be, but try to have that holistic picture for you all to see when we talk about different forms of energy and what's going on in the state. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll jump to the energy matching funds. I hope this slide is helpful. I know there's been some confusion in the past around how much money has actually been allocated to the energy matching funds program. So I hope that this slide helps paint that picture a little more clear. Back in 2022, it was in the budget. It was original $100 million. I think where some of the confusion might come from is in that budget, there was also $75 million to the governor's office for infrastructure projects. That was not a part of the energy matching fund. So just want to clarify that. Of that $100 million, when we talk about the investments that we made, I think it's important, and that's why I have asterisks there. The $8 million of that was earmarked and went directly to the School of Energy Resources for a coal refinery project. And then $10 million was also earmarked, which was essentially for us to help some of our coal mines move roads as they're trying to access more coal. So I just want you all to know when we talk about the Energy Matching Funds program, just shave off that $18 million because that's not a part of that, but was in that section of the budget. Then the next year, the legislature decided to add another $50 million to that program. Then the following year, another $5 million. You'll also see it that $5 million mark was also where the large energy matching fund program was stood up at $100 million. So when we talk energy matching funds in total from the energy matching fund and a large fund, it's $255 million is in the total appropriation. In the light blue column, for y'all to know today, we're sitting about $22 million left in that light blue column. In the orange one, we're still at the full $100 million. We have not spent any on large energy projects, which I'll get into a little bit later. The next page, I think it's really important to understand why the Energy Matching Fund, or at least the intent at the time of the Energy Matching Fund, was to ensure there was a federal bill passed out east that had a lot of energy projects in it. Some of those projects that received federal grants would require, say, a 50-50 cost share or 80-20 cost share. So at the time, the legislature and the JAC wanted to make sure that Wyoming could maybe help a company land those projects in the state of Wyoming and help with that 50 or 20% cost share, whatever it may be. So that was really the original intent. I have the legislative language here because I think it's also important. I know Mr. Obermueller mentioned earlier what's called out and what's not called out. But I'd point first and foremost, it says that we can do research, demonstration, pilot projects, commercial deployment projects related to the Wyoming energy needs. So that's very broad as to, what are those needs. Then it goes further to say included but not limited to, so it opens the door as well. But it does specifically call out things like carbon capture and storage, things like hydrogen production, transportation, as well as wind and solar. I know Mr. Obermueller mentioned earlier that oil and gas is not called out. We have been delegated to administer this program, obviously, but with the included but not limited to language, we look at that as, okay, we can do oil and gas, we can do coal projects and those sort of things, but I just want folks to understand that we try to take guidance from what's written in the law, and what's in there directs us in a certain direction towards some carbon capture projects and other things. On the next page, you'll see that I started at section B. Section A is exactly the same as what I just read you. So in the large energy matching funds, that section A is the exact same in the regular matching funds and the large energy matching funds. What's a little different in the large is you'll see that in this, it does specifically call out the one-to-one match. That is not in the original energy matching funds, but in the governor's delegation letter to us, it is spelled out that we are to do at a minimum of one-to-one match. It also specifically calls out in the large EMF that we as the Energy Authority shall administer it. Also points out that in D, that if we do one of these large energy projects, that there's a stipulation that that company cannot come back to the state for more financing in the future. That's a caveat that's not in the first EMF. And then lastly, I think most importantly, it's defined as the state's participation in the project being over $50 million. So that's what is defined as large in the law. So I think just hopefully that is helpful when we talk about the different projects that have been, or different programs that have been stood up and what we try to manage at the Energy Authority. The next page, we'll walk through the process, and we've tried to make this as non-bureaucratic as possible, but also understand that we have good checks and balances in place when we're talking about hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars. So we do this tri-annually. So every 4 months, we close off what is our concept paper portal. So if you all had say a project you wanted to do and you submitted it to us today, it's a $10 million project, you had 5 million, we had 5 million, we would accept you in the July 1 batch. We review those concept papers, we see who has their match, who's dotted their I's, crossed their T's, how realistic does this project look like? Is it in Wyoming? You'd be surprised, we've got a lot of proposals that aren't even in the state of Wyoming. But that's one of the things we look at. You hit the yes on those, we move you to a full proposal. So to dive much deeper into your project, the financing, the market potential, all these different things. And at that point, you come to a review committee that consists of myself, Randall from the governor's office. We have Aaron Campbell, our state geologist. Lon's not on the review committee, but those EOR projects you heard about earlier, when we get an EOR project in, we send it straight over to them. They're the experts on this. We say, what are your thoughts? What do does the funding seem realistic? Does this field seem realistic? Those sort of things. The review committee will meet and we question the project proponents as to what, specifically, we have workforce services and business council, different entities with different questions. Then we provide a recommendation at the end of the day. As you all know, these are not housed with us. We do not approve them, the governor does. So all we do is, our group is provide him a recommendation, whether that's to fund in full, not fund, cut down, whatever it may be, and he has the ultimate decision to accept, deny, or alter that recommendation. The next piece down that little picture there that I think is very important, and you heard about it from the person who spoke from the public earlier, the 10-day public comment period. That is not called out in statute. We took it upon us to do that because we feel very strongly that the public does need to have a chance to comment on these projects. So when we provide that recommendation, the minute we do that, we put it out in a press release that, hey, here's the recommendations that are going to the governor. Please comment on these projects. Tell us what you think, if you like them, if you love them, if you hate them. And then I compile those and bring them to the governor as he makes his decision. At that same time, we have the Attorney General do their review on the constitutionality as well as the legal review for the law. And then, as I said, lastly, it goes to the governor for his final say. The contract and funding negotiations, the energy matching funds obviously is not in the Energy Authority, and I mentioned we have 8 people. It is a bear to implement, I will be honest with you. We have some of these contracts that will get done in 2 weeks, some take as long as 6 months, depending on the company. So Braden Konar is here today. He's our investments director, really manages that whole piece to make sure we're following the timelines and that they're doing their reporting. That reporting that we require for each project is a quarterly report, and then as the project finishes is a final presentation to my board of directors. Let's see, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Any questions on the energy matching fund?
Question here. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Krager, on the previous slide, it mentions the process to go with the Management Council and the Appropriations Committee. In that diagram you have there, where does that fit into the diagram where the Management Council and Appropriations Committee are alerted to this proposed or future expenditure?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. In the law, it says that we must notify Management Council before we spend any money. So when the governor has made his decision, we then, I don't, the governor's office, I believe Randall sends that off to LSO at that point. So what have we done so far with the energy matching funds? We've done 24 projects to date. You can see the allocation on the right, the split out. There's been one renewable project, one nuclear project, and the remaining have been benefiting either mining or fossil fuel in some form or fashion. The middle one, I think, is important. Again, we were mandated either by the governor or by law to do a 1-to-1 match. As you can see in that middle pie chart, we have far exceeded that. We've spent a little over 124 million of that 155. And we've leveraged over 400 million on top of that. That could be either federal investment or private investment. But those are the numbers thus far on the matching piece. You also see on the far left the requests that we have. I think in this next round, we're coming up near $1 billion that have been asked. Obviously, we don't have that, so we funded a fraction of that, which doesn't make us the most popular entity amongst some folks, but that is the numbers right now. Again, when this energy study we're doing, we're having more concrete numbers to bring you all in the fall. One thing that I want to point out that I know, again, was not called out in the law and sometimes gets us in a little hot water, but it's how do we decide if matching needs to be the day they come to us or down the road? And for an example, we have made it very clear, and we've been very strict with companies, that when you come to us asking for money, that you need to have your match in hand when you come to us. That we are not going to essentially give you money, and then you can use that to go raise capital, and hopefully, months down the road, you've raised that capital and we move forward with the project. Now, in full transparency, that has made some projects difficult. But again, in administering taxpayer dollars, we felt very strongly that we should not be the first capital into these projects, that we should be really that last push to get it over the finish line to make sure it happens here in Wyoming. So that's something we've stood very firm on. It is not in the law. That is just something that we have decided to do as we've implemented it. Again, we run into some issues on some projects, but we've also been able to do 24 projects over the last couple of years with this, so I don't.
Oh, question here. Oh, Representative Campbell's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Krager. When we were picking these projects, do we take into any consideration how much subsidies or any of the federal subsidies or anything along that line, to where, because they're subject to change, to where we kind of look at that and kind of make a decision based off of how much federal help these projects are getting?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, yes, absolutely we do. Again, I'd point back to the original intent of the fund was to make sure we're helping that, whether that's 50%, 20% cost share. So one of our first projects was about $9 million from us. They had 40 million from DOE and then some from them as well. So yeah, we look at that. Obviously, with the change in administration, some of those have paused. But again, we talked about 45Q. That has been the main incentive that a lot of these projects have. So since that looks like it's continuing to move forward and in current law is, there's not a huge concern. I will say in the more recent rounds that we've done, understanding some of the changes in funding out east, if they've secured, say, a DOE grant at the end of the last administration, and are needing cost share from us, we will let them go through our process, but we will not execute a contract until we know that that funding is there.
Other questions? JR?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say, I was just browsing your website, and you'd mentioned in that flow chart about public participation, 10-day comment period. So if I send an email request on your Stay Connected link, would I receive those notices of your comment periods?
Mr. Chairman, yes, if you sign up for our newsletters, yes, you'll get those.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. We also put them in the newspapers and try to get that out as best we can for folks to comment. And honestly, that ebbs and flows. We'll get a lot of support letters on some rounds and folks that aren't as happy on some rounds, and then some rounds it's crickets. So we're trying to do our best to get that out to the public so they know they have an opportunity to comment on those projects. And as we move to sort of future funding, if it's the energy matching fund, or I know as alluded to earlier, maybe a more pointed program around, say, infrastructure or EOR or nuclear, whatever you all may want to do, I think it's important to understand the sort of landscape that we're seeing from other states as well. So we stood up this program, as I mentioned, back in 2022. There are around 14 states that have similar programs that are energy development programs, including Texas and North Dakota, ones that are certainly competitors of ours. I want to point back to that original map I showed of the change in electricity markets and from sources. Something that I think is notable is the state of Texas. They have looked at standing up a nuclear division in their energy office, and they're talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to go towards that, which could be a little tricky for us. They are our largest importer, I should say, of Wyoming coal. They take about 40% of our exports, the state of Texas does. So that demand signal, if they're shifting some of their stuff to nuclear, I think is worth noting, because that could spell some more troubles for us down the road. Obviously, we're trying to do what we can to keep coal marketable to them, but I do think for this committee's sake, it's important to understand sort of the competition that we're facing amongst other states and sort of directions they're going.
Yeah. Representative Campbell, go ahead with the question.
I'm just curious, what, as far as the direction towards nuclear, to what extent is that being forced by the federal government's hand in the fact what we're looking at over in the Permian Basin? How is that applicable to that per tail rub?
Mr. Chairman, being forced by the feds, I would say we're not being forced to do these. I would say Secretary Wright, the new Secretary of the Department of Energy, he studied nuclear. That was part of his graduate degree, and he's very strong proponent of nuclear. So his office has reached out to us about, hey, what have we done? Because we were sort of leading the nation on these micro reactors as well as the advanced reactors. So he's asked, what's going on there? What did we do? How did we incentivize that? But none of that's being forced on us, I would say.
Okay, yeah, no, I no further questions. Thank you.
Yes. Representative Knapp.
Director, so you mentioned 24 different projects. What is our return on investment, or what would you see as a success in any of the given projects?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, that's a good question. Each of these, and again, I'll point back to the statutory language where we can do anything from commercial to pilot. So the defining success in those is a little bit different. I'd point to these EOR projects that were discussed this morning. Exoil, for example, was 20 million from us, or 2 million from us, 2 million from them for a pilot to show that it works in that field. Just on that pilot and what we expect to return from that will be about $4 million. So we'll get our investment back. But if that field, or if that works, they own the fields nearby, and we're talking upwards of 800+ million long-term revenue. So that's something we look at on the pilot front. We've also done ones around carbon capture on, say, Jim Bridger. We were helping with a FEED study on that. obviously from our take is if that is going to help keep our coal plants burning, then how much coal are we going to continue to produce? And essentially, how many tons are we going to save by them keeping that plant running to meet, say, environmental regulations that may be there? So it somewhat varies. I will say that report that we'll have in October will lay out sort of our ROI thesis on each of those, as well as if we've hit them, right? If we haven't, we need to be transparent as that as well. I do want to say one thing too. We're not going to bat 1,000 on these projects. I just want everybody to know that. We do our best to make sure we have that, but I don't, no company bats 1,000. So I just want to be very clear on that.
Representative Campbell, do you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I do. I'm just kind of curious, and this might be a question for our mining guys, but uranium is I believe it's the most dense energy matter that we have. What is the life expectancy of Wyoming's mining, looking at uranium? How many years are we going to be mining uranium? Because my concern, most specifically with uranium, is, once it's spent, then we got a half-life at 24,000 years. So how long is Wyoming's mining for uranium viable, per curiosity?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer for you for how long we will mine. There's obviously a lot of factors that go into that. We obviously have a ban on Russian imports. I think that's a huge help for our domestic markets. We're also seeing a little shift. This is different from during, say, the Cold War, where there was a race for weapons. This is more a race for electricity. So maybe a little more stable price as we look at the spot price of uranium. I will say we have 2, I believe, operating. I know Mr. Deta is here, can correct me. I think 2 operating mines, and expected to have 4 at the end of this year going. But a lot of that is based on the movement of geopolitical things that are going on.
Quick follow-up. The reason that I'm asking that is people tell me that there is a finite time to oil and gas and coal. Oh, we only have 200 years worth of coal. Oh, we only have 150 years worth of oil. How long do we have with your mining uranium? Because, this is also a resource. This is another mineral that has a finite amount. So when we're jumping in there, I'm looking at long-term use versus, or short-term cause and effect kind of things when we consider our energy going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good question. I can try to get you an answer for that. I know, when you talk about the energy density of uranium, there's kind of a good comparison that a ton of uranium or a pound of uranium produces the same amount of energy as 20,000 pounds of coal. So it is very dense. But again, how long will that, last us? That's a good question. I could come back and get you an answer for that.
Past your left time, Mr. Campbell. Any other questions for Rob? Other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Rob, for your presentation. Thank you for being with us today. I see you have your able-bodied assistant up with you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I had not intended to get up here, but I think I have an answer to Representative Campbell's question. So according to our let me see if I can get this so I can read it. Regarding the reserves of uranium. Now, how long timeline, I couldn't tell you, but our estimates are we have a reserve of 106 million pounds of uranium at $30 a pound. If the price goes up, which we're over $50 a pound today, we have a reserve of 350 million pounds. So I don't know, I couldn't put a timeline on that. Obviously, that's flexible as demand goes, but that's the reserve roughly that we have right now that's been identified.
Go ahead, Representative Campbell has a question.
The reason that I was asking that was because with increased use, it used to be, we knew that it was energy dense matter, but we didn't utilize it to the potential that it could be for commercial operations. And now that's being looked upon globally a lot more. So I'm just wondering, how consumption versus mining data going forward versus the past. I think there's going to be a higher demand.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're absolutely right, Representative Campbell. And I think when you look back historically, when we were mining at our peak, conventionally mining uranium back in the 1970s, we're mining about 13 million pounds a year. More recently, going back to probably the late 2000s, we're about 3 million pounds a year. And very recently, it's been 25,000 pounds a year. So I think, going forward realistically, once we get up and running, I think you could probably look at, for the foreseeable future, maybe up to 5 million pounds a year.
But that doesn't count if we can replenish our spent fuel either, so we can double the life of it.
Mr. Chairman, you're correct.
Mr. Chairman, could I add just one thing to that I think is important when we talk about the market and the economics around mining? There's also currently today, when we talk about enriched uranium, there's companies that are still downblending like Soviet-era weapons to use into nuclear reactors. So there's quite a stockpile that's been built up over the years. So the future forecasting for demand on uranium, and more specifically enriched uranium, can get a little tricky sometimes.
Okay, there being no further questions, thank you. Thank you, Director Krieger and your able-bodied assistant there. Any public comment on this subject? Public comment. We have about 10 minutes left for public comment. I see we have one on, okay. One in-house and we have one on Zoom, I think. No? Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, David Bush, Black Hills Energy. Just real quickly, I wanted to speak on the process that we're working on with the Wyoming Energy Authority with the large loads and the third-party generation. That's been a good process for us so far. We're still kind of early into that, but just wanted a note of support of that process and how it's working out, and having the ability to come in and have those frank conversations and discuss some of these issues that I know Senator Rothfuss has worked on with this committee for a while, specifically with the large loads and just how we work through that going forward as a state. So really just compliment Director Krieger and his team on how they put that process together for us. So that was all.
Questions for Mr. Bush? Here you go. Representative Tarp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Bush, since you brought yourself up here, could you comment on your CO2 project or capturing out of the flue gas? Just comment where you're at with that and your carbon capture project, please.
Sure, I can. I was going to do that later this afternoon, but I can do it now, Mr. Chairman, if you'd prefer, whichever way.
This afternoon would be good.
Okay.
This afternoon would be good.
Yeah. I knew I shouldn't.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bush. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? Seeing none in the room, none in Zoom, we'll close public comment. And, did we
Sorry,
have one?
Mr. Chairman, she just raised her hand.
I didn't see it.
Sean Taylor raised his hand.
Sean Taylor.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Sorry, technical difficulties here. Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. I'd much rather be there in person with you all, but my wife is out of town and I got a sick kid at home, so I appreciate you let me join in on Zoom. And I wasn't sure if I was going to jump on or not, but I got a tie and jacket on for you all, so I just thought I'd jump on and reiterate what Mr. Bush said and support what the Energy Authority is doing in the electricity realm. We're taking some pretty big issues that we've talked about for a number of years, both in front of you all and the legislature as a whole, and trying to find some solutions, some Wyoming solutions to some Wyoming problems. The cooperatives, we stand ready to work with anybody and everybody and all the stakeholders to try and see if we might be able to find these solutions to the benefit of our citizens. I won't go into any detail. I think most of this is going to be handled over in corporations. But since we talked about it a little bit here today, I just thought I'd pop in and say that the co-ops are ready and able to help the state of Wyoming address these issues. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? Any questions for Mr. Taylor? There is no questions for Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Sean.
All right.
Thanks for being with us.
Bet.
Any other, there's no one else on the Zoom? Okay, we'll close public comment, and committee directives are none. Did you think we had some? No, Brian? Okay. Okay, then we'll recess for lunch. We'll be back here at 1:30 to hear from the department, the DEQ.
Did you work as a truck driver for a while?
No.
4 hours with no pee break.